Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by 𝐼𝐼𝐻6348 on Wattpad. Now let's start. Deku opened the door to the league's bar and walked up to 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐲𝐬, ignoring the others present. He cheerfully asked if there was anyone new 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐲𝐬 wanted dead. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐲𝐬 glanced at Shigaraki, who was clearly annoyed by Deku's disregard. Shigaraki answered, suggesting All Might. Deku smirked, pointing out that All Might was not new to the list. Then, a voice from across the room chimed in, suggesting 𝗟𝗏𝐻. Deku considered this, thinking it would be a fun challenge to take down the number 2 hero. Later, Deku arrived at his hideout, which he referred to as his super-secret villain lair. As he sharpened his knives, he contemplated various methods to eliminate 𝗟𝗏𝐻. After considering options like poison and more elaborate plans, he decided on a sneak attack, believing that catching 𝗟𝗏𝐻 off guard would give him the advantage he needed. Deku tracked 𝗟𝗏𝐻 for weeks, studying his schedule and preparing for the perfect moment to strike. He resolved that the following day would be the day he would confront 𝗟𝗏𝐻. The next morning, Deku woke up early, knowing the streets 𝗟𝗏𝐻 would patrol that day. He positioned himself behind a building, pressing his back against the wall and gripping his knife tightly. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the hero approaching. Taking a deep breath, he jumped out from behind the building, intending to surprise 𝗟𝗏𝐻. However, 𝗟𝗏𝐻 quickly stepped back, narrowly avoiding the blade. He grabbed Deku's arm, activating his quirk and leaving a burn mark. Deku, realizing 𝗟𝗏𝐻's grip was tight, used it to his advantage. He propelled himself upward, flipping over 𝗟𝗏𝐻 and breaking free. He stood his ground, retrieving another knife, now armed with one in each hand. He lunged at 𝗟𝗏𝐻, managing to land several quick strikes before retreating to avoid sustaining too many burns. Suddenly, Deku found himself surrounded by a ring of fire, with 𝗟𝗏𝐻 slowly advancing toward him. He adjusted his grip on the knives, preparing to throw them, but the heat was overwhelming, making it difficult for him to fight at full strength. Realizing he needed to end the confrontation quickly, he summoned the last of his energy. He pulled 2 more knives from his sleeve and threw all 4 at 𝗟𝗏𝐻, aiming for vital points. As he collapsed to his knees, he felt himself fading into unconsciousness, catching a glimpse of 𝗟𝗏𝐻 falling beside him as the metallic scent of BLD filled the air. A bystander, walking home from a rough day at work, turned the corner and stumbled upon the scene. He was shocked to see 𝗟𝗏𝐻, the pro hero, knocked out and bleeding. Unsure of what to do, he called the authorities. Eventually, the police arrived, placing both Deku and 𝗟𝗏𝐻 on stretchers and taking them to an ambulance. The bystander marveled at how his mundane Thursday had turned into a dramatic encounter with a nearly lifeless hero. As Deku slowly began to regain consciousness, he squinted against the bright light and tried to lift his arms to shield his eyes, but they wouldn't move. Panic set in as he realized he was restrained. He looked around the room, noting the straps holding his legs and chest down, and what felt like ropes binding his hands to the headboard of a small bed with white sheets. The room didn't resemble a hospital. Suddenly, he heard a cough and turned to see 5 adults in the room, 2 of whom he recognized, while the others were unfamiliar. One of them was All Might. After an awkward silence, Deku broke the tension, asking if they were going to speak or just stare at him. Nizu, the principal of UA Academy, introduced himself and explained that a detective wanted to ask Deku some questions. Deku insisted he would only answer if they released him from his restraints, expressing discomfort with being immobilized. Nizu agreed to free him if he promised not to attempt anything. Deku assured them he would comply. Nizu then signaled to Aizawa, who was in the room, and instructed him to release Deku from the scarf that had bound him. As Aizawa complied, Deku sat up, stretching his arms and legs. He looked up and asked what questions they had for him. Deku sat up on the bed with his legs dangling off the side. Most of the people in the room looked a bit on edge when he moved, which made sense. All they knew about him was that he had taken down 𝗟𝗏𝐻. He wondered if 𝗟𝗏𝐻 was alive and thought he would need to ask later. While he was lost in thought, the detective pulled up a chair and sat somewhat close to the bed, but not close enough to be within reach. He took out a clipboard, trying to appear professional. He started with a question that seemed rather pointless. He asked for Deku's name, clearly expecting an answer. Deku smirked and replied, "John Doe." The detective was interrupted by a man called 𝐼𝐬𝐬, who suggested that the detective should let Deku be. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 seemed to understand villains, which Deku appreciated. The detective then asked for Deku's villain name. This was a question he had been waiting for. With a grin, he declared, "The Reaper." He noticed 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬's smile falter for a moment. It was amusing how just a name could instill fear. The detective stuttered slightly as he repeated the name, and Deku enjoyed the reaction. The detective wrote it down, his hand visibly shaking, which was entertaining to watch. Next, the detective inquired about Deku's age. Deku casually replied, 15. This revelation surprised them, as it was not every day one encountered a 15-year-old with a reputation for violence. The detective moved on to ask how long Deku had been a villain. This was a complicated question. He had always wanted to be a villain, but there was no official test to determine if one was a true villain. So, he decided to base it on the first time he had taken a life. About 4 years. "But I've only had my name known for less than a year," he answered. The detective then asked if Deku was part of the League of Villains. Deku shook his head, stating that the League was filled with immature adults, while he considered himself a different kind of villain. The detective had only a few more questions. He cleared his throat and asked about Deku's kill count. The room fell silent, and Deku could sense the anticipation. He had seen people guess his kill count ranging from 30 to 50,000. He locked eyes with 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬 and said, "Why would anyone keep track of that? I might be sick, but I'm not that sick." The room was taken aback. He continued, "Let me guess. You want the count so you can judge me based on my word. Probably because everyone else has around 15 kills at most. They can keep count." The detective pressed further, asking if Deku had more than 15 kills. Deku leaned in slightly, keeping his hands visible to avoid alarming the detective. In a low voice, he asked if the detective got off to people's kill counts. The detective quickly denied it, and Deku decided to turn the tables by asking a question of his own. He inquired about the number of innocents the detective believed he had murdered. Deku explained that he wouldn't label all of them as innocent. Many had made enemies who had paid him to eliminate them, or they were simply people the world could do without. The detective grew impatient, wanting a simple count. Deku smirked, enjoying the banter. He estimated that he had taken out around 3 to 10 bounties a week, along with bystander kills, and those who were better off gone. When pressed for a total, Deku playfully deflected, stating that if the detective wanted to know, he should do the math himself. After a long silence filled only by the sound of scribbling, the detective asked if Deku wanted to know his own death count. Deku firmly replied that if he had wanted to know, he would have kept track himself. The silence was thick, and then 𝐒𝐮𝐬 unexpectedly stated that they had their work cut out for them. Confused, Deku wondered what that meant. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 explained that UA was trying a new villain rehabilitation program, aiming to help young villains like Deku change their ways and potentially become decent citizens or even heroes. Deku couldn't help but laugh at the idea of being the world's best hero. However, he quickly sobered and stated that he would rather go to jail. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 responded that Deku did not have a say in the matter. He would be under the supervision of Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬. 𝐼𝐬𝐬's class, Class 1A. As today was Friday, there was tonight, tomorrow, and the day after to get settled into the dorm room and meet the other students. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 got up and walked out of the room, followed by 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬 and the detective, leaving 𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐬 and recovery girl with me. I assumed we were in the nurse's office since UA's school nurse was present. 𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐬 tossed me a metal bracelet, instructing me to put it on. It looked like a quirk cancellation cuff. I couldn't help but chuckle internally at how they all believed I had an incredible quirk. I slipped it on, treating it as a joke. 𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐬 then motioned for me to follow him, and I complied, knowing it was wise not to get on my new teacher's bad side. I trailed behind him through several hallways. While we walked, he spoke, but I wasn't fully focused. He mentioned something about the consequences of harming others, but my mind wandered to thoughts of 𝐾𝐿 being at this school. Suddenly, a gut feeling struck me, and I calmly asked if someone was following us. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 responded, warning Ms. Midnight that any mischief would result in her being put to sleep. I acknowledged his warning, and we continued walking. I noticed scorch marks on my clothes from my earlier fight with 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐿. Rolling up my sleeve, I checked for the burn handprint, relieved to find it gone. I thought to myself how skilled Recovery Girl was. Time passed, and we arrived outside the Heights Alliance buildings. We entered the first building, where I was instructed to wait in the main lobby area before meeting the other students. I settled onto a couch and waited. Todoroki was studying with Yaoyorozu when 𝐼𝐬𝐽 entered the dorm area, looking a bit disheveled. He glanced at Kaminari and 𝐼𝐮𝐲, who were engrossed in a video game. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 requested that the rest of the class gather immediately. Kaminari and 𝐼𝐮𝐲 jumped from their seats and dashed down the hallway, announcing that their teacher wanted everyone together. Within minutes, the entire class was assembled in the main area. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 began to speak, announcing that there would be a new student. Excitement erupted among the students, cutting him off. He raised his voice, urging them to quiet down so he could finish. He explained that the new student was a villain, which caused gasps and confusion among the crowd. Ida voiced his concerns about the potential dangers of having a villain join their ranks, sending a shiver through everyone. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 asked if he could continue, and the room fell silent, eager for more information. He revealed that the new student was a teenager, just 15 years old, and that 𝐒𝐮𝐲 believed he would be a perfect candidate for a new program aimed at villain rehabilitation. He mentioned the quirk cancellation cuff the student would wear but also noted the student's physical strength, emphasizing that if they worked together, they would have a good chance of survival in case of an attack. He then opened the floor for questions. I raised my hand, and 𝐼𝐬𝐽 acknowledged me. I asked where the new student would be sleeping. He explained that the student would stay in the dorm room, with a lock installed on the door and security cameras set up to monitor any suspicious activity. Satisfied with the answer, I noted that no one else had questions, and 𝐼𝐬𝐽 stated he would bring the new student in, advising everyone to behave. As 𝐼𝐬𝐽 left, the students began chatting among themselves, some adjusting their hair, all uncertain about what to expect. Meanwhile, Deku found himself bored, waiting in the lobby. He checked his sleeves for any concealed knives, frustrated to find that the pros had confiscated them all. Hearing the door from the stairwell open, he saw 𝐼𝐬𝐽 holding it open, signaling him to follow. He stood up, ready to face the group of students waiting for him. Climbing the steps to the third floor, 𝐼𝐬𝐽 opened the door to the dorms, revealing 19 anxious students eagerly anticipating his arrival. As the door shut behind him, Deku stood before the crowd of aspiring pro heroes, feeling a sense of superiority over them. A voice from the back called out to him, and he recognized 𝐾𝐿, who stepped forward, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. A grin spread across Deku's face. He was ready for this encounter. 𝐾𝐿 stammered, questioning how Deku could possibly be a villain. Deku reveled in the moment, knowing that everyone believed he was a hero enthusiast. He stepped closer to 𝐾𝐿, who instinctively took a step back, sensing the tension. Deku playfully remarked that he had always preferred villains, emphasizing how it was deemed socially unacceptable to admit such a preference. 𝐼𝐬𝐽, noticing the interaction, casually asked 𝐾𝐿 for the new student's name. 𝐾𝐿 looked up, realizing he was the only one who recognized the villain standing before them. His name was Izuku Midoriya, and he was determined to keep it a secret. Without hesitation, he lunged at 𝐾𝐿, attempting to pin him down. He grabbed 𝐾𝐿's arm and placed his leg behind his knee, causing him to stumble backward and momentarily halt his words. As soon as 𝐾𝐿 hit the ground, Izuku found himself ensnared by the same restraints that had healed him in the hospital. Immobilized by the scarf, he watched as a red-haired boy tried to help 𝐾𝐿 up, only to be met with 𝐾𝐿's stubborn refusal. Izuku couldn't stop 𝐾𝐿 from revealing his identity now. With a mix of frustration and urgency, 𝐾𝐿 declared that Izuku's name was Izuku Midoriya. The revelation sent a wave of tension through the room. Izuku felt a surge of anger. He couldn't move his hand, but he wanted to retaliate. 𝐾𝐿's retort about the last time Izuku had moved his hand was fair enough, so he let it go. The red-haired boy, however, seemed to connect the dots. He exclaimed that he had heard the name before and questioned if Izuku was the kid who had gone missing the previous year. Izuku felt a swell of pride as he turned to 𝐼𝐬𝐬, asking him to undo the restraints with a smirk. 𝐼𝐬𝐬's response was cautious, asking if Izuku would refrain from attacking his students. Izuku assured him he would leave them alone, and the restraints loosened, allowing him to stretch his arms and shoulders. He declared that he was indeed the missing kid, but warned that he wouldn't hesitate to take down anyone if it came to a fight. He had more BLD on his hands than the heroes could ever save, and he was not to be underestimated. Turning his back to them, he walked toward the wall, leaving the room in stunned silence, except for one voice that broke through the tension, asking how many people he had killed. Leaning against the wall with a smile, Izuku replied that the number was 2,034, many of whom were pro-heroes. He mentioned that some had died in the streets, while others had been rushed to hospitals only to succumb later. He found a twisted joy in the chaos he had caused, relishing the horrified expressions of those around him. 𝐼𝐬𝐬, looking weary, seemed to want to end the encounter. Still smiling, Izuku asked where he would be sleeping. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 gave him a look that conveyed his exhaustion with the situation and instructed him to follow. As they walked through the crowd, Izuku made eye contact with several students, enjoying the fear he instilled in them. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 led Izuku to his room, explaining that he would be confined from 11 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. to prevent any late-night escapades. Izuku spent the night contemplating his circumstances, plotting his escape, and considering how to handle 𝐾𝐿 while avoiding becoming like the self-righteous heroes he despised. His room was simple, with black bed sheets, a barred window, and a sensor that would alert someone if he tried to open it. There was a desk, a chair, and a dresser filled with uniforms. After rolling his eyes at the sight, he rummaged through the drawers and found some casual clothes. He changed out of his villain outfit, which still bore scorch marks, and completed his nightly routine before going to bed. The next morning, Izuku slowly opened his eyes, memories of the previous day flooding back. He groaned at the realization that it was already 10 a.m. Mornings were never his preference. He preferred the cover of night for his activities. The thought of killing stirred a craving within him, and he missed the familiar weight of his knife against his skin. Determined to find something sharp, he left his room and made his way to the kitchen. To his relief, the space was empty, giving him free rein. He raided the fridge, grabbing eggs, cheese, salt, pepper, and bacon bits. As he searched for a pan, he kept an eye out for a knife. Suddenly, an unsettling feeling crept over him, as if someone was watching. He called out, suggesting that if they wanted to talk, they should show themselves. He mumbled to himself about the absurdity of being watched while making scrambled eggs, amused by the irony. The presence around him seemed to tense, revealing that they hadn't realized he was aware of them. The thought was almost comical, especially for those who aspired to be heroes. After the remark was made, 6 people emerged from various hiding spots. There was a red-haired boy who had tried to help 𝐾𝐿, hiding in a room down the hallway. A blonde-haired boy with an interesting lightning bolt-shaped black stripe in his hair was hiding with the redhead. A small purple figure was positioned behind the island, while a fully pink girl was next to a brown-haired girl. A blonde, energetic French boy was also concealed behind the island. The atmosphere was tense, and the silence was palpable. The narrator observed that it seemed everyone was either bored or scared. They turned back to the eggs they were cooking, feeling the awkwardness of being watched. The sounds of shuffling indicated that the others had likely moved to the couch or the island to whisper among themselves. Once the eggs were cooked, the narrator asked if anyone had questions or if they simply wanted to let their curiosity run wild. The silence persisted, prompting a plea for someone to speak up, as the situation was becoming increasingly annoying. Finally, the brown-haired girl broke the silence, asking about the narrator's quirk. She mentioned that 𝐼𝐬𝐬 had said there was a quirk cancellation involved, and she expressed curiosity about how the narrator had taken down 𝐒𝐮𝐲 in one move without their quirk. The narrator explained that this question was common in the media, and many struggled to accept that a quirkless child could be so strong. They revealed that people often guessed their quirk was something like agility. The pink girl beside the brown-haired girl pointed out that the news had yet to reveal the narrator's quirk. With a grin, the narrator declared that they didn't have a quirk at all. This prompted an outburst from the blonde boy with the lightning bolt, who called out disbelief. The narrator suggested that if they didn't believe them, they could ask 𝐾𝐿, who would happily confirm that they were just a quirkless nerd. At that moment, 𝐾𝐿 entered the room, looking curious about the mention of his name. The narrator explained that they had been discussing their quirklessness and how 𝐾𝐿 often called them quirkless. They walked closer to 𝐾𝐿, teasingly listing the names he had called them in the past. The class fell silent, and the narrator relished the feeling of stirring chaos. They turned back to the class and shared that 𝐾𝐿 had been a big, scary bully throughout elementary and middle school. 𝐾𝐿, in a low voice, told the narrator to shut up, but they continued, recalling a time when 𝐾𝐿 had told them to take a swan dive off the roof. This comment brought a hush over the room, and the narrator reveled in the moment, anticipating the chaos that would follow. In a brief recap, it was noted that Deku had told everyone that 𝐒𝐵𝐵𝐸 had suggested he should kill himself. Kirishima, observing the situation, felt the weight of the intensity. He recognized that 𝐒𝐵𝐸 could be abrasive, but suggesting someone take their own life was crossing a line. He glanced at 𝐒𝐵𝐸, who appeared unusually sad, a stark contrast to his typical anger. Kirishima approached 𝐒𝐵𝐸 gently, asking if he wanted to talk. 𝐒𝐵𝐸 looked up, tears in his eyes, and nodded. They walked out of the room together, leaving the others in silence. As they exited, a villain's taunt echoed behind them, mocking 𝐒𝐵𝐸's struggles. Kirishima shut the door, not wanting any more negativity to affect his friend. In the quiet that followed, Kirishima asked how 𝐒𝐵𝐸 knew the villain. To his surprise, 𝐒𝐵𝐸 opened up about his past with Deku, revealing that they had grown up together as friends, though 𝐒𝐵𝐸 had often bullied him. He recounted how he had been accepted into UA and had left Deku behind, forgetting about him until a call from 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃, Deku's mother, inquiring about his whereabouts. 𝐒𝐵𝐸's expression turned somber as he recalled the day headlines announced a new villain on the streets, leading to the tragic loss of life. He admitted that he had been indifferent at the time, not realizing the gravity of the situation. Now, he was grappling with the knowledge that Deku was the one responsible for the chaos, and the weight of guilt settled heavily on his shoulders. Kirishima, unsure of what to say, could only watch as 𝐒𝐵𝐸 struggled with his emotions. Before leaving for UA, 𝐒𝐵𝐸 had expressed his thoughts about a certain individual. He believed that this person would have a better chance of becoming a villain, as they both shared a common trait: they were adept at being pushed around. After sharing this opinion, 𝐒𝐵𝐸 had given him a light kick and walked away. One of his friends, noticing 𝐒𝐵𝐸's emotional state, asked if he regretted his actions. 𝐒𝐵𝐸, visibly shaken and teary-eyed, seemed to confirm that he felt remorse for being unkind. His friend suggested that since the individual was back, perhaps they could try to get along. 𝐒𝐵𝐸, however, felt that the other person would want nothing to do with him. He suspected that the individual only regretted not retaliating harder when they had the chance. Although 𝐒𝐵𝐸 had stopped crying, he still appeared a bit unsteady. His friend attempted to comfort him, pointing out that the individual was a villain and that provoking 𝐒𝐵𝐸 was part of their nature. 𝐒𝐵𝐸 acknowledged this but couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was karma for his past behavior. His friend reassured him that he had the support of the 𝐒𝐵𝐸 squad and that they wouldn't let a villain ruin his life. They could face challenges together, and even suggested that another friend could help if necessary. 𝐒𝐵𝐸 chuckled at the light-hearted comment, but he insisted that he needed to confront his own battles. They then left the room and headed to the kitchen, relieved to find that the villain was no longer present. They spent the afternoon playing video games until they decided to go out for food with the rest of the 𝐒𝐵𝐸 squad. Throughout the day, 𝐒𝐵�E's friend received numerous messages from classmates curious about what had happened to 𝐒𝐵𝐸. Later that night, after getting 𝐒𝐵�E's permission, he shared a brief summary of the events with their classmates. Meanwhile, in another part of the school, Deku was feeling frustrated. He mocked 𝐒𝐸 for not being able to handle his own problems, suggesting that he needed to toughen up. Deku had survived on the streets and felt that 𝐒𝐸 would struggle in a similar situation. However, his rant was abruptly interrupted when Izuku's scarf wrapped around him, silencing him and restraining his movements. Izuku reprimanded Deku for starting fights so soon after the incident, reminding him to control his emotions. When a girl pointed out that Deku was quirkless, Izuku turned his attention to him, asking if it was true. Deku smirked and replied ambiguously. Another student chimed in, questioning the necessity of Deku's restraint. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 explained that the cuff served purposes beyond quirk cancellation before leaving the room. Deku, feeling isolated, grabbed some food and returned to his room, ignoring any attempts at conversation. He was determined to find a way to escape the situation. The next morning, Deku awoke to the sound of an annoying alarm. Frustrated, he got ready for the day, showering and preparing himself. He reluctantly put on his UA uniform, which he found unappealing. Checking the time, he realized he had some time before classes started. As he pondered who would 𝐼𝐻 him to class, he noticed that it was already getting late. He decided to head to the commons area, where he found only 2 other students, 𝐾𝐿, who was hurriedly putting on his shoes, and BNHA, who was anxiously waiting for him. Mina, noticing Deku, expressed her concern about being late and the possibility of detention, seemingly unaware that Deku couldn't leave without a pro hero accompanying him. I just laughed and mentioned that I was actually planning on skipping today. 𝐾𝐿 and 𝐼𝐻 exchanged glances, and then rushed out the door, eager to make it to class on time. Glancing at the clock on the wall, I noted it was 7. The pro better arrive soon, otherwise I would be late, but honestly, why would I care? What if the pro got attacked by villains on the way? That thought made me chuckle. Just then, 𝐼𝐻 burst through the door. I wrinkled my nose in response. He asked if I was ready for school, practically shouting in my face. I scowled and walked out the door, him trailing closely behind. He exclaimed that he had a quicker way to get to UA, but I retorted that I would rather crawl than speed my way there. He insisted that I would be late, and I reminded him that it was his fault for showing up at the dorms late. After that, he fell silent for the rest of the walk. Time skipped to when I entered the classroom. As soon as I stepped inside, all eyes turned to me. 𝐼𝐻 remarked that our favorite villain had decided not to skip today, likely because 𝐼𝐻 and 𝐾𝐿 had told him I was absent. I decided to have a little fun with them. I clarified that I never said I was going to skip. I had been waiting for 𝐼𝐻 because I wasn't allowed outside without supervision. Before I could finish, 𝐼𝐻 tried to interject, but 𝐼𝐻 cut her off, stating he didn't care what had happened and instructed me to take my seat. I complied, turning to the class and announcing that they could call me Deku or even the Reaper if that made them more comfortable. 𝐼𝐻 simply told me to sit down. After a day of classes, we returned to the dorms. I decided to play a little game with 𝐼𝐻. As a wave of students flowed into the hallway, I merged into the crowd, following the movement. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed 𝐼𝐻 heading to Class 1's door, only to find I wasn't there waiting for him. I continued with the crowd until I reached the front gate. Just as I attempted to pass through, the school went into lockdown, sealing the gate shut. This bracelet needs to come off now. I scanned the area for an escape route and spotted a tree. I sprinted toward it, but as I got closer, dizziness and fatigue overwhelmed me. Maybe if I just closed my eyes for a moment. The next thing I knew, I was unconscious. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in the nurse's office. I tried to sit up, but the restraints held me down. Turning my head, I saw 𝐼𝐻, 𝐼𝐻, and Recovery Girl. The door opened, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 walked in. I greeted him with a playful tone, asking if I had done something wrong, my expression clearly showing I was tied down. 𝐼𝐻 sighed, asking if I could go one day without causing trouble. I pointed out that I hadn't caused any trouble the day before. Instead of 𝐼𝐻 responding, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 spoke up, reminding me that I was supposed to avoid causing any issues. I retorted that they shouldn't have let a known troublemaker into UA. 𝐼𝐻 then addressed me, but I interrupted, insisting he not call me by that name. If I weren't restrained, I would have shown him just how I felt. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 continued, explaining that they wanted to see me succeed, but I couldn't do that by breaking the rules. He asked what I would have done if I had gotten past the gate. I thought for a moment. I had wanted to see 𝐼𝐻's face when he realized I had made it to the dorms by myself, but part of me also craved the thrill of escape. I finally admitted that I had already succeeded in becoming one of the most feared villains and would have run away, evading the heroes and picking them off one by one. I ended with a laugh that I knew would unsettle them. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 exchanged a glance with 𝐼𝐻, and suddenly, The restraints were undone. I wondered how long I had been out. Looking out the window, I saw the sun rising. Had I really been unconscious for a whole day? Nizu cryptically asked Aizawa if he was sure he wanted me to go through this. Aizawa replied that if my classmates couldn't handle it, they shouldn't be at UA. In my perspective, I was confused about the task at hand. Aizawa explained that they wanted me to act as the villain, attempting to hunt down the hero students in a mock city while they tried to capture me. I asked if I could use my knives, hoping for a positive response. Nizu mentioned that a knife created by the support class could be used. It didn't have real blades, so it couldn't cut, but it could still serve as a knife. The protagonist felt disappointed, thinking they were just dull knives. Nizu clarified that they weren't dull, they utilized light energy. If one were to stab it into a wall, it would penetrate, but if thrown at a person, it wouldn't cause harm, only leaving a red mark on their outfit. The protagonist found this advanced technology intriguing. Aizawa then inquired if they still had their villain outfit. The protagonist confirmed they did, though it had scorch marks from an encounter with 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐿. They asked about 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐿's condition, wondering if he was alive. 𝐼𝐻𝐬, from the back of the room, reminded them that they were the one who had been arrested, prompting a playful response from the protagonist. Nizu informed them that 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐿 was still recovering in the hospital. The protagonist recalled the fight, realizing they had hit 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐿 in critical areas while barely conscious, feeling a sense of satisfaction about it. Aizawa then asked if they wanted to wear their villain outfit or a gym uniform, mentioning that they could get a new outfit soon if they could go a week without causing trouble. The protagonist chose the villain outfit, finding it much cooler than the gym uniforms. After changing into their villain outfit, the protagonist felt confident as they entered the commons area, where 𝐼𝐻𝐬 awaited them. They nudged past him and walked towards the main UA building, slowing down to match 𝐼𝐻𝐬's pace, unsure of their destination. They soon approached what appeared to be a closed-off city, marveling at the school's resources. As they neared Class 1A, Aizawa was explaining the task at hand. Upon their arrival, Aizawa acknowledged 𝐼𝐻𝐬's presence and pointed out where the protagonist's knives were located. The protagonist nodded and walked over to the table, examining the daggers. The handles seemed ordinary, but the blades had a glass-like appearance while feeling metallic. Testing one on their finger, they noted that it didn't hurt, only leaving a red mark that resembled a freckle. With a knife in hand, the protagonist plunged it into the table, noting it penetrated as a regular dagger would. There were 9 knives in total, 5 throwing knives, 2 daggers, and 2 regular knives. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 began explaining the rules of the exercise, stating that the heroes needed to capture the villain either by using capture tape or by knocking them unconscious. The protagonist's mission was to capture the heroes or hit them with their knives. The class gasped at the mention of the protagonist having a weapon. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 reassured them that the knives wouldn't cause serious harm, only leaving red marks to indicate they had been hit. If someone received too many hits or a critical hit, they would be deemed immobilized and have to exit the arena. The last one standing would not have homework for the next week. With that, the protagonist was told to enter the arena, given 15 minutes before the aspiring heroes would enter. They didn't venture far into the city, instead setting up traps to separate the heroes for easier one-on-one confrontations. Hiding behind a building, they listened to the students discussing their search for them. Knowing the heroes would attempt to use their capture tape, the protagonist planned a quick strike. They climbed onto a rooftop, observing the heroes below as they searched for them. The protagonist stifled laughter at their eagerness to ambush. Most were in groups, but a few had wandered off alone, making them easy targets. Scanning the area, the protagonist spotted a bird-themed hero in a back alley, deciding he would be their first target. They began running across the rooftops, determined to catch up to him. Climbing down and hiding behind a garbage bin in the street, the protagonist prepared for a sneak attack, waiting for the right moment to throw the knife at his back. He planned his attack carefully, wanting to catch his target off guard for a clean hit. As he moved stealthily, he noticed the figure ahead stop and turn around, leaving him momentarily surprised. How did the hero sense his presence? Next to the hero stood another creature, but there was no time for questions. The moment their eyes met, he smirked and launched 2 throwing knives at them. As the hero dodged the blades, he seized the opportunity to approach from behind. With a swift motion, he struck, landing a blow that would have been lethal if he had been using real knives. The hero turned, shock and fear evident on his face, and he reveled in the sight. He retrieved his throwing knives and began to walk away, while the hero moved toward the exit. 1 down, 18 to go. Exiting the alley where he had taken down the first hero, he locked eyes with Kaminari, who, without looking at the person beside him, tugged on the girl's jacket. She turned to him, annoyance on her face, but her expression shifted to surprise as she spotted him. Knowing they would follow, he dashed into another alley. He heard them shout that they had found him. He ducked behind a building, gripping his knife tightly. As soon as the hero rounded the corner, he swung his knife, landing a strike at their throat. When he looked to see who he had hit, he smirked at 𝐾𝐿, winked, and then ran off. 2 down, 17 more to go. He acknowledged that he was a bit rusty, but in just 5 minutes, he had only 2 targets down. He needed to pick up the pace. Climbing another building for a better vantage point, he spotted someone with red and white hair. This hero hadn't noticed him yet, so he took aim with one of his throwing knives. Just as he prepared to throw, the hero jumped off the building. What was with these heroes? Were they insane? He rushed to the edge, expecting to see a fall, but instead he saw ice below. That must be the hero's quirk, and it could be a problem for him later. He chuckled to himself, enjoying the villainous laugh he had perfected since childhood. Focusing on the ground, he counted 15 of the remaining targets. Suddenly, he felt something brush against his leg. Realizing the other 2 heroes were following him, he reacted instinctively and kicked at whoever was touching him, only to find that his kick had no effect. It was the red-haired hero trying to ensnare him with capture tape. Jumping back to assess the situation, he noted that no nearby buildings were close enough to leap to, and jumping down could lead to injury. His knives might not cut through the hero's defenses, but perhaps he had found a loophole. He spun the knife in his hand and took a fighting stance, aware that another hero was still lurking nearby. The red-haired hero, seemingly confident, challenged him, but his face betrayed a hint of fear. Kirishima felt a chill as he faced his opponent. Staying in rock form provided him some protection, giving him a fighting chance. He charged at the villain, but before he knew it, the villain was behind him. Something struck his back but shattered harmlessly. Deku muttered a frustrated word under his breath, realizing his plan had gone awry, but it worked to Kirishima's advantage. Deku drew another knife, one in each hand, and Kirishima prepared the capture tape again. He charged at the villain, but instead of confronting him, the villain leaped off the roof. What was with these villains? Peering over the edge, Kirishima expected to see some hidden quirk, but instead, he saw the villain hanging from the side of the building, his knives embedded in the wall. This villain was skilled. Deku couldn't believe his luck. Inspired by the bicolored hero, he climbed down slowly, glancing up to see the red-haired hero watching him. He could have taken him down, but it would be difficult to knock him out. Instead, he decided to escape. If only he could act without restrictions, he would have pushed the hero off the building, but Aizawa had made it clear that killing was off the table. Once he reached the ground, he darted into another alley. As he ran, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning quickly, he spotted a large hero who had consumed sugar to gain strength. He needed to remember these names, but it didn't matter now. Stopping to face the hero, he noted the fatigue in the hero's expression. "Prepare to go down, villain," the hero declared, trying to sound heroic, though he knew how silly it sounded. Both combatants took their fighting stances, and the protagonist skillfully spun his knives in his hand for intimidation. He smirked as the opponent charged at him, noting that heroes often made the first move, revealing their inexperience. He executed a classic feint, stepping in one direction before darting in another. The opponent barely missed him, allowing the protagonist to land a quick scratch with his knife. It was a hit, but not enough to take him out of the fight. Putting his knives away, he was aware that Aizawa was watching, and he was eager to showcase more of his skills. The opponent rushed at him again, grabbing his arm in an attempt to spin him around with a tight grip. With a powerful throw, he sent the protagonist crashing into the wall, knocking the air out of him. The protagonist feigned unconsciousness as the opponent approached, nudging him and calling out to his classmates, boasting about his supposed victory. While the opponent was distracted, the protagonist sprang back to his feet, retrieving a throwing knife and launching it at the opponent, hitting him squarely in the back. With 3 down and 16 to go, he approached the group of heroes the opponent had joined, reclaiming his knife. The muscular hero walked away in defeat as the protagonist greeted the remaining heroes, which included a shy rock user, a boy with a tail, and a short one with unusual hair. He knew he needed to handle them quickly before more arrived. He threw 3 knives simultaneously, one grazed the short hero, another was blocked by the tail user, and the last struck the shy rock user. Recognizing the tail user as his biggest threat, he assumed that his quirk was related to his tail, while the short hero's quirk likely involved the peculiar orbs on his head. Drawing one of his daggers, he advanced slowly, noting the tail user standing his ground while the short hero appeared to panic. Weakness was the worst thing to show a villain. Suddenly he lunged at them, grabbing the short hero's arm and placing a knife to his throat. He made a swift cut before releasing him, causing the short hero to retreat in the same direction as the shy rock user. Now, only the tail user remained. The tail user looked frightened after witnessing how easily the protagonist had dispatched the others. It was likely his first encounter with a live villain whose sole aim was to eliminate. The tail user assumed a fighting stance, and the protagonist stood tall, adjusting his posture and retrieving his last throwing knife. He recalled how the tail user had blocked his previous throw with his tail. He threw the knife, then switched to a dagger and charged at the tail user, stabbing him in the back while he was distracted by the blade. With 6 down and 13 to go, the protagonist began to walk away. After a few blocks, something fell on his head, a net. He looked around, seeing no one nearby. As he cut through the net, he noticed a piece of capture tape approaching. Using the momentum from cutting the net, he slashed through the invisible girl's midsection. The invisible girl expressed her surprise, claiming they had him. The protagonist sensed that she was not alone and inquired about her companions. She responded with sass, stating she was dead. He knew she was merely bleeding out, as were the others he had encountered. He pressed her for information, but she remained tight-lipped, insisting she would take it to her grave. Hearing a noise behind him, he leaned closer to the invisible girl and decided to ensure she understood her fate. He stabbed her again, then kicked backward, hitting the person sneaking up on him. It was a black-haired girl who appeared disheveled from the impact. Despite her surprise, she stood her ground, earning his respect. He realized she had underestimated his observant nature, which was a significant mistake. This time, he initiated the attack, charging at her with knives drawn while she formed a pole in her hand. She swung it at him, narrowly missing as he dodged. He complimented her skills, enjoying the element of surprise that compliments could bring in battle. She acknowledged her training, and he noted her tiredness and breathlessness, recognizing that she wouldn't last long in a prolonged fight. As she swung the pole again, he caught it and pulled her close, quickly stabbing her in the chest. Stepping back, he smiled and acknowledged her effort. She returned the compliment as he slipped down the back alley, leaving 8 down and 11 more to go. Deku moved through the alleyway, eager to finish the fights quickly as boredom began to set in. He spotted 3 wannabe heroes walking away from his direction. In front of him stood a brown-haired girl, a blue-haired boy, and a sparky blonde-haired boy cowering behind them. Sensing the blonde boy's fear, he decided to act swiftly, throwing one of his knives and hitting the sparky boy squarely in the back. I wouldn't expect anything less from myself. I'm skilled with knives. Instead of realizing he's out, the sparkly boy doubles over in pain. He knows the knives can't actually hurt him, right? Either way, it causes an alarm and gets the attention of the other 2. They immediately take up a fighting stance. They have experience in real combat, at least the blue-haired boy does. Regardless, I won't underestimate them, and they better not underestimate me. I stand my ground, then dart behind the corner of the building, just out of their view. I hear their footsteps and swing my blade at them as soon as they turn the corner. Looking to see who I hit, I realize it's both of them. That was an easy fight. I slashed through both of their torsos. In a normal fight, this wouldn't have been fatal but would have definitely caused them to stumble, giving me enough time to finish them off completely, so I count it as a victory. They both stare at me in shock as I start laughing at how simple this fight was. I glance over and still see the sparkly child on the ground. I mockingly suggest that they go comfort him as I walk away from the fight. 11 down, 8 more to go. I scale another building, this time finding it empty. I look across the sea of buildings and count 8 people. I start making a mini plan. Among the remaining students, my biggest threats are probably the half-red-haired kid and the full red-haired kid. I can't stab one of them, and the other has a really powerful quirk. I look back down and count the people again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Where did one go? I gasp as I realize it's the half and half guy. I scan the top of the building, but it's empty, except for me. I start walking the perimeter, hoping to see if he's climbing up. No, he wouldn't do that. He would just use his ice to scale the building in an instant. Then I start hearing a siren-like noise. No, that's an alarm of some kind. This might be my chance to escape. If the pros are busy dealing with this situation, I could break free. I climb back down the building as I see pros rounding up the students. Once I confirm that no pro or student is looking at me, I dart inside one of the buildings. It's empty inside, but hopefully, they won't realize I'm here. Not even a minute later, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 practically kicks the door in and tangles me in his scarf. Well, there goes that plan. How did he find me so easily? He reminds me that they can track me, his voice as monotone as ever. Then, a second later, he's knocked out on the floor. What is happening? As soon as I see him down, I turn to look at the person responsible. I see. Toga. She threw a chair at 𝐒𝐮𝐬. Where did she get the chair from? I ask her why she's rescuing me, thinking the league hated me. She explains that 𝐒𝐮𝐬 might feel that way, but I will always be her little cinnamon roll, and the league needs me for something. I tell her not to call me that and express my suspicion that they only need me for a mission. She insists we should go, saying her legs hurt. I still have the issue of the cuff on my wrist. If I keep it on, the heroes will know where I am, and if I take it off, the pros will certainly be alerted. She hands me 3 real knives, sharp, deadly knives. I run my finger over the blade, cutting myself slightly, which brings a smile to my face. The thought of taking down those wannabe heroes fills me with excitement. I tell her to give me a second to remove the cuff. She nods, and I use one of the knives to slice at the cuff. It doesn't come off. I realize it's only a matter of time before the pros realize I'm not with the rest of my class. They might assume I'm with 𝐒𝐮𝐬, but he was supposed to communicate with others once he got me. I catch 𝐒𝐮𝐬 starting to move again and urge Toga to go. I need to get this cuff off while we're running, otherwise, they will find us in an instant. We need to get as far away from 𝐒𝐮𝐬 as possible. He could easily take us both out. I notice Toga falling behind. I forgot she wasn't the best at endurance. She's better at straight-up combat, which is a useful skill, but not the best for escaping. I tell her to come on and give her a piggyback ride. Once we reach the league's headquarters, I can have 𝐒𝐮𝐬 disintegrate the cuff. That sounds like a solid plan. I see a portal appear, and as I go through it, I feel a weight lift off my back. Toga. 𝐒𝐮𝐬's capture scarf has grabbed her. The league is going to have my head for this one. Deku felt a rush of panic as he realized the gravity of the situation. The league was like a family, and with Toga taken, he knew they would want revenge, especially if the heroes did anything to her. He had always resented their close bonds, as he preferred to keep his emotional distance. He stepped through the portal and found himself at their bar. He urgently called out to Shigaraki, asking him to use his quirk to remove the cuff binding him. The threat of the heroes discovering their location motivated Shigaraki to comply, disintegrating the cuff. However, the portal closed behind him, leaving Toga behind. Twice, from the corner, inquired about Toga's whereabouts, and the room fell silent as everyone turned to Deku. He felt the weight of their gazes, knowing he had to tread carefully. He gripped his knives tightly, preparing for the worst. After what felt like an eternity, he was interrupted by 𝐾𝐮𝐬, who informed him that Toga had been captured by the heroes. However, he reassured Deku that if they could rescue him, they could also save her. Relieved, Deku realized he wouldn't have to run away in fear. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 continued, telling Deku to relax his grip on the knives, as they needed his help with something important. His curiosity piqued. Deku asked what they needed from him and what he would gain in return. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 explained that he would no longer be under the hero's control, but Shigaraki abruptly interjected, revealing that they needed Deku to torture someone. Deku considered the request. While they had saved him, he still wanted something in return. He agreed to help, provided they wouldn't bother him for the next month. The deal was struck, but he questioned why they couldn't handle the task themselves, given their impressive quirks. Shigaraki explained that the person they needed to interrogate had a strong will and was someone Deku knew personally. They needed information about All Might, and the individual was too stubborn to cooperate. Deku's heart sank as he realized the person in question was Bakugo Katsuki. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was now in a position of power over his former rival. With a smirk, he asked where Bakugo was. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 opened a portal, gesturing for Deku to step through. He entered a dark room where Bakugo was chained to the ground, his quirk cancellation cuff in place. Bakugo looked up, his eyes filled with fear, sadness, and above all, rage. Time shifted to Toga's perspective. She was struggling to keep up with Deku as they ran, marveling at his speed and cuteness. When he looked back at her with disappointment, she knew she was slowing him down. He urged her to hop on his back, and as they approached a portal, she felt something tighten around her neck. Realizing that holding on would lead to both of them being captured, she let go. As she was wrapped in the scarf of a hero she had previously knocked out, she decided to make things difficult for them, refusing to walk and instead sitting down. They dragged her along, and soon she found herself tied to a chair in an interrogation room, of her knives. When a detective entered, accompanied by the principal and her teacher, Toga recognized the latter as Aizawa. She snapped back at the detective, eager to get the questioning over with. After answering basic questions, she was offered a choice: jail or rehabilitation. Toga immediately chose jail, wanting to meet new friends. However, the principal explained that if she entered rehabilitation and still exhibited villainous tendencies, she would end up in jail anyway. Reluctantly, she agreed to the rehabilitation program, though she made it clear she wouldn't be happy about it. Bakugo's head throbbed as if he had just been knocked out. He opened his eyes and surveyed his surroundings. He realized he was on his knees, hands chained to the floor, and his legs were also restrained. He needed to check if he could still use his quirk. Attempting to create mini explosions yielded no results. Footsteps echoed in the cement room, drawing his attention. He glanced down at the shoes before his gaze traveled upward to meet the face of a long-lost friend. However, this was far from the child he once knew. Those green eyes had darkened with time and rage. Bakugo thought about the rage they both shared, though they channeled it in very different ways. Deku's eyes locked onto Bakugo's. He expressed a twisted sense of nostalgia, revealing that he had missed Bakugo, even mentioning how he felt lost without the bullying. Bakugo noticed the shame in Deku's demeanor, a small victory in his mind. Deku was searching for information on All Might, and Bakugo found it odd that they hadn't pressed him for what he knew. Perhaps they underestimated him, thinking All Might hadn't shared anything significant. Bakugo avoided eye contact, feeling a mix of anger and pity. He had always thought Deku was supposed to be strong, but now he seemed weak. Deku approached with a knife in hand, lifting Bakugo's chin with the flat of the blade to force eye contact. He leaned in, whispering about All Might. Bakugo reacted instinctively, swinging his head in an attempt to fend off the threat. He felt the knife slice across his cheek, a reminder of his vulnerability. Deku taunted him, questioning whether he would resort to more insults or if he had anything of value to share. Bakugo felt a surge of anger at being labeled a bully, but he refused to give in. Deku brandished a sharper blade, cutting off Bakugo's shirt and tracing his fingers across his bare back. He began to carve a letter into Bakugo's skin, and Bakugo struggled to suppress his cries of pain. Deku continued, asking if Bakugo had any information on All Might. Bakugo remained defiant, refusing to speak to a villain. Deku expressed disappointment, continuing to carve into Bakugo's back, spelling out the word bully. Bakugo felt tears escape his eyes, a mix of pain and humiliation. Deku mocked him for showing weakness, but 𝗏𝐻𝐽 shouted back, expressing his anger. Deku left, and 𝗏𝐻𝐽 was left alone, feeling the burning pain in his back. He began to assess his surroundings, realizing he was in a fully cemented room with no door and a small window high up. There was a bed and a toilet, but escape seemed impossible. Then, he heard someone enter the cell. It was the warp gate user, who silently unlocked the chains but kept the quirk cancellation cuff on before leaving. 𝗏𝐻𝐽 remained kneeling, knowing it would hurt to move. He mentally prepared himself and slowly made his way to the bed. He planned to attack the next person who entered the room, knowing they would be vulnerable during the portal transition. Exhausted from the pain, he fell asleep on his stomach. Deku returned to 𝗏𝐻𝐽's cell, bringing food and finding him passed out on the bed. He placed the food against the wall and approached 𝗏𝐻𝐽, who lay face down, exposing his back. Deku applied healing ointment to the cuts he had inflicted, hoping to prevent infection. He couldn't afford to lose 𝗏𝐻𝐽, their information depended on him. Deku understood that Shigaraki had tasked him with this job because 𝗏𝐻𝐽 knew him, but he suspected that was why 𝗏𝐻𝐽 wouldn't break. He wouldn't want to appear weak in front of someone familiar. After leaving the food, Deku exited through the portal, which took him back to his old apartment. He examined the room, filled with his old belongings, realizing that the heroes might search for him here soon. He decided to find another place to stay, perhaps an abandoned building. As he contemplated his next move, a sweet scent filled the apartment, accompanied by a purple fog. He quickly felt drowsy and succumbed to sleep. I try to upload parts whenever I'm bored, and with everything happening, I'm often bored, so expect at least a chapter a week. Though most of the time, it's like 3 chapters a week. I hope you enjoy this story and that you keep reading. Deku's perspective. He opens his eyes to see light shining through a window. Looking closer around the room, he realizes he's in his dorm room at UA. He feels a sense of frustration wash over him. The heroes have caught him again. They were probably waiting for him at his apartment, knowing he would eventually return. He thinks about 𝗏𝐻𝐽 and how, if the portal hadn't been sent there, he could have escaped the heroes. But there was nothing he could do about it now. Getting up from his bed, he walks to the door and tries to open it, but it won't budge. They must have locked him in to prevent any escape attempts. Sitting back down on his bed, he checks to see if he has any knives on him, but they have all been taken again. What else could he expect from UA? After about 10 minutes, he hears a knock on his door. He responds, asking what the hero wants. Aizawa's voice comes from the other side, asking if he is allowed to come in. At least he has some manners, knocking and asking first. Deku agrees, still sitting on his bed. The door unlocks and Aizawa enters. He informs Deku that he escaped and then got recaptured. He mentions that Nizu was able to handle the police, and if it weren't for him, Deku would have been sent to a maximum security prison as a 15-year-old. Aizawa tells him he has been given another chance to redeem himself. There's a pause that feels long, but is probably only a few seconds. Deku asks if there is anything else Aizawa needs to say, making it clear he doesn't want to be there. Aizawa has a few more things to discuss, starting with the whereabouts of 𝗏𝐻𝐽. Deku responds, questioning why Aizawa thinks he knows where 𝗏𝐻𝐽 is and asks about Toga. Aizawa explains that they figured Deku's escape had to do with 𝗏𝐻𝐽 being kidnapped and mentions that Toga is in Class 1B, adapting well to the students, unlike when Deku first arrived. Deku realizes Aizawa is still upset about the incident with 𝗏𝐿. He admits that he doesn't know where 𝗏𝐿 is, but he does know he is in the League's hands. Aizawa then asks how Deku planned his escape. Deku replies that he didn't plan it at all, it was all the League's doing, and they never truly meant anything to him. He just went to them for jobs. He wonders if he shared too much, but he needed to vent to someone, and Aizawa was there. Curious about what will happen next, he asks if classes are happening as normal. Aizawa informs him that he will be attending classes, but he and Toga will have an extra class focusing on why villainy is bad. Deku feels a mix of emotions about the extra class. Later, he leaves his room to get food, realizing he hasn't eaten anything since yesterday. Walking to the door, he finds it opens this time. The heroes have put the quirk cancellation cuffs on him again, as expected. He heads down the hall to the kitchen, where he sees some aspiring heroes. They look at him as if he has done something wrong. He grabs a bag of chips and turns back to them. One of the heroes, a redhead, immediately asks what he has done with Bakugo. Deku can't help but smile at the concern this boy shows for his friend. He smirks, enjoying the fact that this guy is so worried about 𝐾𝐿's disappearance. He teases them, suggesting he could have harmed 𝐾𝐿 in various ways, enjoying the reaction it provokes. Suddenly, a hand slaps him across the face, causing his head to turn. He touches his cheek where he was slapped and turns back to the boy, his smile widening. He remarks that it's been a while since he was slapped that hard and admits he deserves it. When asked why, he leans in closer, whispering that he tortured 𝐾𝐿, carving the word bully into his back because that's what he is. The boy freezes, and Deku can't tell if it's from shock or fear of what might have happened to 𝐾𝐿. The pink-haired girl rushes over to check on the frozen boy. Deku grabs the bag of chips and walks over to the couch, sitting down and starting to watch the news, trying to catch up on recent events. He hears the lightning guy comment that Deku is really an awful person. Deku acknowledges it, saying he finds it fun. Finally, the others decide to leave him alone. As he watches the news, he learns that some people are graffitiing anti-UA messages around town. He finds it interesting, noting how the news often portrays UA as the villains, which he finds amusing from a villain's perspective. After a few minutes, a brown-haired girl sits next to him. She doesn't seem bothered by his presence, which he finds strange. He considers the possibility of swaying her to the villain's side. It could be an entertaining challenge. He decides he needs to see her true intentions. It had been a day and a half since Bakugo last saw anyone. The absence of that annoying nerd was palpable, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the other boy was out there, living life to the fullest while he was stuck here. His back was improving slightly, but every movement still sent sharp pangs of discomfort through him. That morning, he had discovered food next to one of the walls, and the mere thought of it made his stomach rumble. After finishing the meal, a portal opened once more. This was his chance. He positioned himself next to the portal, ready to strike as someone stepped through. With a swift motion, he swung at the newcomer, sending them crashing to the floor, unconscious. As he looked down, he realized with a sinking feeling who he had knocked out. It was Kirishima. Why was he here? Bakugo couldn't help but panic at the thought that he might have ruined Kirishima's mission to rescue him. He shook Kirishima, trying to rouse him. Eventually, Kirishima stirred, looking groggy and disoriented. When he finally focused on Bakugo, his face lit up with relief. "Bakugo!" he exclaimed, jumping up to embrace him. Bakugo winced at the sudden pressure on his back, and Kirishima quickly noticed his discomfort. Concern etched on his face, Kirishima grabbed Bakugo's shoulders and asked if he was okay. Bakugo brushed it off, insisting he was fine, but turned to reveal the marks on his back. The atmosphere shifted as Kirishima's expression darkened upon seeing the carved letters. "Did Deku do this to you?" Kirishima's voice was serious, a stark contrast to his usual cheerfulness. "Yeah, and I think he's planning more," Bakugo replied, feeling a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Kirishima reassured him that Deku was back at UA and had given him information on Bakugo's whereabouts. His friend's smile returned as he recounted how he had found Bakugo. "I even slapped him when I found out what he did to you," Kirishima added, a hint of pride in his voice. "Good," Bakugo said, feeling a sense of camaraderie. "That nerd deserved it. So how did you find me?" As Kirishima explained, they moved to sit on the bed together. He detailed how Deku had informed him that the League had Bakugo, leading him to Toga, who had been captured on the same day. Kirishima had bravely confronted her, asking for information about the League's hideout. She hadn't given him much, but she directed him to a specific alley where he could potentially meet a member of the League. Kirishima had asked Momo to create a tracker that he could ingest, ensuring that he could be located even if the villains searched him. After following the alligator guy in a hoodie, he had been captured but managed to wake up in a bar, where he was told to go through the portal to see Bakugo. Bakugo felt a flicker of hope as he processed Kirishima's words. If they were being tracked, it meant they could be rescued soon. "So we're going to be saved soon, right?" he asked. "That's the plan," Kirishima confirmed. Bakugo couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement at the thought of taking down the villains. Meanwhile, at UA, Deku sat in the common area, surrounded by Class 1A. Aizawa entered, looking weary, and the students eagerly shared their plan to rescue Bakugo. Kaminari spoke with enthusiasm about their strategy, but Aizawa raised an eyebrow, questioning the wisdom of storming the villain's base. They explained how they had tracked Bakugo's movements to a bar, which they suspected was the League's main hideout. Kirishima had been stationary for hours, leading them to believe he was still safe. Aizawa remained skeptical, warning them of the dangers involved. He voiced concerns about the possibility of Bakugo being dead or worse, but the students were determined. They believed in their friend and were ready to take the risk to bring him back. As they prepared for their mission, the tension in the air was palpable, each student fueled by the hope of reuniting with Bakugo and bringing him home safely. Or he could just be kidnapped. They may never know. The speaker looked down but still smiled, enjoying the tension in the air. It was amusing to see their expressions shift at the thought that one of their friends might have betrayed them or that he was gone, leaving their efforts in vain. The brown-haired girl sitting next to the speaker declared that they were still going to try to get their friends back, no matter the cost. She emphasized their care for each other, mentioning how even Bakugo, with his tough exterior, had moments of kindness, like helping them study and sharing popcorn during movie nights. She insisted he wasn't all bad, and then spoke of Kirishima, who had a heart of gold and cared for everyone, even if he didn't receive the same love in return. The speaker interjected, pointing out that Bakugo was still a bully, regardless of his moments of niceness. They made it clear that they had ensured Bakugo would remember that. Ida, curious, asked what that meant. The speaker replied that if they found Bakugo, they would see, but that was only if they found him and made it out alive. With that, the speaker stood up and walked to their room, relishing the last word and the unease it created among their friends. There were people at the speaker's house, and they were not pleased about it. They had a foam head and needed help naming it, hoping for some masculine name suggestions but open to gender-neutral options. They just wanted a good name. The speaker signed off, reminding everyone to stay safe and take care of their mental and physical health, expressing love for their audience and wishing them a good day before leaving. In Deku's perspective, the heroes seemed foolish, believing they could defeat the League. He had never been a fan of them, only seeking work with the League, which had paid him for his services. Despite his doubts, he acknowledged that the heroes cared for each other, much like the League did, and it was a nice thought to have people who cared for him in that way, but he knew that emotional ties could become liabilities for a villain. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. When he yelled for the person to state their purpose, he was met with a request for help. He opened the door to find Kaminari, 𝐼𝐻, and Ishido standing there and reluctantly invited them in. Inside the dimly lit room, they stood awkwardly until Deku turned on the lights, momentarily blinding them. He casually mentioned how many times he could have harmed them if he had his knives, which startled them. After settling on his bed, he acknowledged that they needed his help to rescue Bakugo and Kirishima. The speaker rushed through the request, hoping Deku would agree without fully understanding. Deku responded slowly, emphasizing the gravity of the situation by reminding them that he was the reason Bakugo was kidnapped and that he had inflicted pain on him. 𝐼𝐻 interrupted, urging Deku to stop, while Mina questioned why he spoke about the League with such disdain. Deku explained that he and the League had a rocky relationship, finding Shigaraki childish and petty, which prevented him from fully aligning with them. He had sought jobs from them in the past, but now he looked forward to their downfall. The speaker connected the dots, suggesting that if Deku wanted to see the League fall, he could help them take it down. This would allow him to laugh at Shigaraki as he desired. Deku appeared to consider this proposition, realizing that working with them could provide an opportunity to infiltrate the headquarters and create a distraction while they rescued Kirishima and Bakugo. When Deku asked what was in it for him, the speaker was caught off guard. They whispered to their friends, trying to recall what Aizawa had instructed them to say in such situations. Mina reminded them of the plan, and they prepared to present their case to Deku. Mina turned her attention back to Deku and mentioned that they had been told they could offer him a day off from his extra class, along with a bag of chips. She pulled out a bag and tossed it to him. He caught it effortlessly, showcasing his remarkable abilities even in casual situations. Deku proposed 3 days off in exchange for the chips. Mina countered with 2 days and a second bag of chips. As she reached for the second bag, her confident expression shifted to confusion. She muttered to herself about having just had it. Deku revealed he had taken the second bag along with her watch and wallet when she entered the room. He tossed her watch back and playfully threw 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐿's wallet at him, mentioning he kept $5 but hoped it was okay. He accepted the 2 days off offer and got up to leave the room. Mina called after him, surprised that he was leaving his own room. He simply acknowledged that he knew it was his room before shutting the door behind him. She found it strange but reassured herself that they had a valuable ally on the inside for their mission. Denki was heard yelling from the other side of the dorms, excitedly announcing that Aizawa had agreed to their plan. Aizawa stood with all might and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐲, discussing the details of their rescue mission. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 addressed the students rushing toward them, confirming that Aizawa would inform Deku about his role in the plan. Aizawa, with his usual tired demeanor, walked down the hall to Deku's room. Deku re-entered his room after leaving the heroes for dramatic effect when he heard another knock. Before he could respond, Aizawa asked if he could come in to explain the plan. Once inside, Deku inquired about how the plan would unfold, wanting to ensure he had a strategy in place. Aizawa explained that he would be equipped with a bug and a tracker. When Deku interrupted to ask if his cuff would be removed, Aizawa confirmed it would be taken off and continued explaining. Deku rolled his eyes at Aizawa's caution as he outlined the mission. Deku would need to act normally to gain access to the league space, as they believed he was still free. Aizawa mentioned that he had heard about Deku's involvement in torturing 𝐒𝐵𝐵𝐸, which Deku confirmed. Aizawa, maintaining his composure, instructed Deku to ask to see 𝐒𝐵𝐸 in order to gather more information. This would allow him to gain entry without raising suspicion. Once there, he would need to inform them that 𝐒𝐵𝐸 had escaped, ensuring that the League was distracted during the rescue. Deku understood the plan and mentioned that he usually visited the League around 9 p.m., though there was no set time. He expressed the need to stop by his apartment for some supplies and to change his appearance, as he felt too much like a hero. Aizawa explained the conditions set by the police for his return to villain life. He would be allowed to stay at his apartment for a week under surveillance, with cameras installed. He could leave only for specific reasons and would be followed by a hero in disguise. Aizawa cautioned him to avoid any serious trouble, emphasizing the importance of not resorting to violence. Deku agreed to the terms, feeling relieved at the prospect of returning to his former life, albeit with restrictions. Aizawa began to leave the room, satisfied with their arrangement. Before he disappeared from view, he paused and suggested that I start packing whatever I wanted from my apartment for the week. Once he was completely out of sight, I felt a mix of excitement and anticipation for the days ahead. I grabbed my villain outfit, still slightly charred, knowing I hadn't had the chance to pack before being captured. They had taken me without warning. I met up with Aizawa, who attached a tracking device to me along with a taser, ensuring that if I attempted anything, I would be rendered unconscious immediately. Once I donned my villain outfit, the heroes removed the cuff from my wrist. Finally free, I rolled my wrist, reveling in the newfound freedom. After receiving a nod from Aizawa, I stepped out into the world. Deku's perspective shifted as he left the 𝐼𝐻𝐬 Alliance building, this time without a pro standing beside him, but rather one trailing behind. He walked for about 30 minutes, observing the bustling streets filled with people. He noticed some criminals lurking in the back alleys, and he could sense the surprise from the hero following him at the sheer number of unsavory characters around. A sudden scream caught his attention, and he turned to see a girl chasing after a thief who had snatched her purse. The thief, oblivious to Deku's presence, collided with him as he ran past. In response, Deku tripped him, feeling justified in his actions. If he had his knives, he might have inflicted a minor wound to remind the thief of his place in the streets. As the scoundrel fell, Deku walked away, hearing the girl use pepper spray on him as she reclaimed her belongings. This was just another average day on the streets, and he could sense the frustration of the hero behind him, who had to maintain their cover while witnessing the chaos. Choosing a path known for its crime, Deku relished the thought of making the pro uncomfortable. The heroes were well aware of the rampant crime in these areas, yet they often chose to ignore it, perhaps believing that if they didn't see it, it didn't exist. It was unlikely they would start paying attention now. Eventually, he arrived at his apartment. Upon opening the door, he noticed that his belongings were in disarray, likely the result of someone breaking in to steal valuables. However, the police had already raided the place and returned everything to its original state. His apartment was modest, consisting of 2 rooms and a bathroom, with a combined kitchen and living area. As he surveyed the space, he noticed the cameras discreetly placed around the apartment. He headed to his dresser to put on a hoodie and jeans, realizing he needed to go out for food, as the fridge was likely empty. Even before his capture, he had needed to restock. Leaving the building, he made his way to the nearest grocery store. From Bakugo's perspective, it had been over a day since Kirishima was captured. They hadn't received any visitors, which made him wonder if the villains were unaware of the nerd's capture. Just then, a portal opened, and he felt a mix of dread and anticipation. He glanced at Kirishima, who seemed on edge. Bakugo tried to maintain an angry expression, but fear crept in. The last time a villain had come through that portal, he had ended up with a painful injury. A villain emerged from the portal, covering his face with a hand and sporting tangled blue hair. Bakugo recognized him as the one responsible for their predicament. He stood up and assumed a fighting stance, declaring his intention to confront the villain. The villain casually dismissed him, warning him not to provoke him, as he approached Kirishima, who was across the room. Bakugo relaxed his stance, knowing that any action could endanger his friend. The villain placed a hand on Kirishima, keeping his pinky finger raised as a threat. He spoke coldly, indicating that one wrong answer from Bakugo would result in dire consequences for Kirishima. Rage surged within Bakugo. Kirishima was only there to help him, and he felt responsible for his friend's predicament. Bakugo demanded to know what the villain wanted. The villain's intention was clear. He sought information about 𝐼𝐻𝐽's weaknesses, the people he cared for, and how to defeat him. His voice was unsettling, as if he were parched. Bakugo questioned whether answering those questions would ensure their release. He glanced at Kirishima, who was struggling to remain calm, fear evident in his eyes. The villain assured them that they would be left alone for a time if Bakugo complied. Reluctantly, Bakugo agreed to answer, though he wasn't entirely sure of the answers. He needed to provide a believable response to keep them both alive. He started to speak, but Kirishima interjected, urging him not to say anything. Bakugo then claimed that 𝐼𝐻𝐽 had a peanut allergy, recalling a moment from lunch when 𝐼𝐻𝐽 had mentioned it. Kirishima quickly caught on and played along, confirming Bakugo's statement. The villain's anger was palpable as he realized he had been misled. With a frustrated gesture, the villain released Kirishima and departed. Kirishima rubbed his neck, where the villain had gripped him tightly. Once the villain was gone, Kirishima looked at Bakugo, expressing his relief with a nervous smile. Bakugo acknowledged the tension, hoping they would escape soon. Kirishima agreed, and they both shared a moment of solidarity in their uncertain situation. For the past week, Deku had been staying at his old apartment. At night, he would wander the back alleys, observing fights unfold. One evening, a pro hero appeared at the scene of one such altercation. The situation felt ironic. There had been a chase, and the thought of taking them down crossed my mind, but I was being watched. Eventually, the professional hero gave up and returned to his companions. It seemed easier to evade capture. These lesser heroes were almost laughable. The day had finally arrived. The day I would betray the League. My feelings about it were mixed. I didn't like the League, but my disdain for heroes ran deeper. I just needed to convince the heroes that I was turning over a new leaf. If I could persuade them that I was no longer a villain, they would let me go, right? I prepared to head to the League's headquarters. I donned my spare villain outfit, the one I kept for emergencies, when my main one had BLD stains, large holes, or scorch marks that needed fixing. Just as I finished getting ready, a disguised pro appeared at my door, handing me knives. I accepted them, feeling the sharp edge prick my finger, drawing a drop of BLD. As I walked toward the League's headquarters, I mentally rehearsed my plan. Upon entering, I spotted some familiar faces. Kurogiri was behind the bar, Shigaraki lounged on a bar stool, and Dabi was in the back, engrossed in a card game with Compress. It was obvious they were cheating, but I didn't care. I noticed the television that usually broadcasted the news was instead showing a live feed from a cell. This could complicate things. I approached the two at the bar, and Shigaraki inquired about my whereabouts. I explained that I had been keeping a low profile since leaving UA, as people were now more determined to hunt me down. He nodded slightly, seemingly satisfied with my excuse. I continued, asking about their new student. Kurojiiri responded, revealing that the newcomer had practically begged to see Bakugo, and they had used him to gather information. A smirk crept onto my face as I pressed for details. Shigaraki interrupted, revealing that All Might had a peanut allergy, which seemed to irritate him. I expressed my longing to extract more information from Bakugo, relishing the thought of seeing him distressed over his friend's predicament. Shigaraki agreed but warned me not to kill them just yet, promising that I would have the chance when the time was right. I insisted that Bakugo was my target, while the others were fair game. I needed to be cautious about my words, aware that heroes might be listening. If they were upset, I could always claim it was part of my villainous act. With that thought, I prepared to enter the cell, intending to deliver my message and leave before the League or the heroes caught up with me. As I stepped through the portal, I expected an empty cell but found Kaken and Kirishima inside. Kaken instinctively moved back, recalling our last encounter. He instructed Kirishima to stay behind him, determined to protect his friend. I noticed a camera aimed at the cell, leaving me with no place to hide my actions. To maintain the secrecy of my mission, I taunted Kaken in a mocking tone, calling him Baby Kaken and dismissing him as pathetic. Kirishima looked surprised to see me out of UA again, clearly unsettled by my presence. I addressed the camera, asking if they could knock the two of them out. A static voice confirmed they could. Moments later, Kirishima collapsed, followed by Kaken. I chained them both to the ground, ensuring I could torment them simultaneously. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to regain consciousness. As I waited, I pondered how this was supposed to be a rescue mission, yet no one had arrived. Perhaps something had delayed them. I noticed the two on the floor beginning to stir. It seemed the time for action had come. I approached them, knife in hand. Kaken, now fully aware, understood what was about to unfold. Kirishima, however, was slower to grasp the situation, only realizing it when Kaken tried to mask his fear with bravado, though it was evident he was terrified for his friend. Standing before them, I moved closer to Kaken, pressing the knife against his neck. Kirishima's worry was palpable. He clearly cared deeply for Kaken. I had wanted Kaken out of the picture since our first day at UA. I pressed the blade into Kaken's skin, drawing a small amount of BLD without inflicting fatal harm. Kaken tensed, likely aware that this was just the beginning. I was careful not to cause too much damage, stalling for time until the heroes arrived. Kirishima, noticing Kaken's injury, spoke up, concern etched on his face. His voice sounded desperate as he pleaded for the pain to stop. The response was chilling, revealing a twisted sense of enjoyment in the suffering of another. The tension in the air was thick, and the idea of resolving conflicts through conversation felt like a distant dream. The intensity of the situation escalated, and he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Just when he thought he could regain his composure, a noise from above interrupted his thoughts. It was a banging sound, growing louder by the second. Then, without warning, the ceiling came crashing down around them. A swarm of heroes and some students from UA burst into the room, catching everyone off guard. The wood hero immediately targeted him, and he felt a rush of urgency. He needed to maintain his cover as a villain, but he also had to be careful not to cause too much damage. Adjusting his knives, he prepared for the confrontation. As the wood hero charged, he swiftly cut through some of the debris, creating a diversion. He noticed another hero sneaking up behind him and instinctively swung his knife, ensuring it would only graze her, not inflict serious harm. It was the brown-haired girl from the dorms, and he decided to give her an opening to take him down. It felt like a small victory against the pros who had failed to capture him. As she approached, he felt a strange sensation. She touched his chest, and suddenly he felt lighter, as if he were floating. He remembered her from the sports festival and realized this was her quirk in action. He had never experienced a floating fight before, and it was a new challenge. Just then he noticed the wood hero's attack coming at him again. He cut through the wood, but something else wrapped around him, signaling the arrival of 𝐼𝐬𝐬. The teacher's scarf restrained him, and he watched as 𝐼𝐬𝐬 nodded at the girl, indicating she could set him down. As he began to fall, he braced for impact, hoping to avoid injury. Just before he hit the ground, the girl touched his shoulder, allowing him to float gently down. He looked over at 𝐼𝐬𝐬, who always seemed so exhausted. He approached 𝐼𝐬𝐬, trying to lighten the mood. The teacher responded with a sigh, surprised that he hadn't caused any serious harm. He reflected on the chaos he could have unleashed if he had truly intended to hurt anyone, but he knew he was being monitored and had limited options. They navigated through the wreckage until they reached a small trail leading to a grassy area filled with parked cars. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 warned him not to attempt anything as someone opened a car door for him. He complied and climbed into the back seat, while 𝐼𝐬𝐬 took the driver's seat and 𝗟𝐼𝐬𝐬 settled in the passenger seat. It was an odd combination of personalities, with 𝐼𝐬𝐬's stoic demeanor contrasting sharply with 𝗟𝐼𝐬𝐬's exuberance. As they drove, 𝗟𝐼𝐬𝐬 blasted music that seemed aimed at a much younger audience, filling the car with an unexpected energy. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 had reached his limit. While driving, he unplugged his phone from the AUX cord and tossed it out the window without a word. The action left a lasting impression. It was surprising to see 𝐼𝐬𝐬 act so decisively, as if he had just disposed of something he would never see again. The atmosphere in the car became tense, hinting at an awkward ride ahead to UA. After some time, they arrived near the Heights Alliance building and walked the rest of the way. Mike was practically shouting the entire time, and by the time they reached the building, a headache had settled in. Upon entering the common area, they were met with a swarm of anxious classmates, all eager to know what had happened. It was no surprise. They hadn't seen him in a week that had been quite eventful. If he had wanted to, he could have easily intimidated anyone who dared to challenge him. These self-righteous heroes no longer seemed afraid of him. He noticed everyone staring, which felt unsettling. He wondered if he had something on his face. The heroes needed to stop staring and start talking. The silence was becoming awkward. 𝐒𝐮𝐬, with his eagerness, asked if they had managed to get 𝐿𝐻𝐬 and 𝐵𝐿𝐻𝐬 back. In a moment of mischief, he considered teasing them, but 𝐼𝐬𝐬 interrupted him with a firm tap on the back of the head. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 confirmed that they had indeed brought them back and that they were currently being taken to the hospital. 𝐵𝐿𝐻𝐬 had sustained the most injuries, but they appeared to be healing well, with only some possible scarring. 𝗟𝗏𝐻 had a few scrapes but would recover, while 𝐿𝐻𝐬 was physically unharmed. Feeling the weight of their curiosity, he began to retreat to the back of the room, knowing they would want to know more about what had transpired. Little did they know he was the one responsible for those injuries. From Momo's perspective, she was surprised to hear Mina ask if Ochako had been hurt. Kaminari chimed in, expressing relief that only work-study students had gone. He felt he might have caused chaos if he had been there. She noticed Deku hiding in the corner, curious about how they had sustained knife wounds. She decided to ask him since he had been with the villains for the past week. Deku's eyes widened in surprise at her question, and he glanced at Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬, who nodded encouragingly. With a hesitant tone, Deku admitted that he may have been responsible for the injuries. The room fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging heavily in the air. This 15-year-old, the same age as most of them, had the ability to inflict harm so easily, and it seemed he lacked any sympathy for his victims. It was evident that he needed serious help. After the earlier events where he had been called out for his actions, Deku retreated to his room. Hours later, he heard commotion in the hallway, piquing his curiosity. He stepped out to find 𝐾𝐿𝐻𝐬, Kirishima, 𝗟𝗏𝐻, and 𝐒𝐮 surrounded by other students, all asking questions about what had happened. Leaning against the wall, he waited for someone to notice him, particularly 𝐾𝐿𝐻𝐬. After a few moments of their heartfelt reunion, 𝐾𝐿𝐻𝐬's gaze locked onto him, anger flashing across his face. Deku greeted him casually, but 𝐾𝐿𝐻𝐬 was furious, demanding to know why he had been with the villains. The intensity of 𝐾𝐿𝐻𝐬's anger was amusing to Deku. He explained that the heroes had instructed him to do so. 𝐾𝐿𝐻𝐬's rage escalated as he accused Deku of harming him. Deku clarified that he took full responsibility for the injuries, revealing that he had been monitored afterward to prevent any real damage. Leaning closer, he whispered that if he hadn't been tracked, he could have caused far worse. 𝐾𝐿 trembled slightly, a detail only noticeable up close. Deku decided to walk away from him and approached the group of students observing the confrontation. As he moved through the crowd, a path opened up for him, and he made his way to 𝗟𝗏. He apologized for injuring her, explaining that he had needed to convince the villains he wasn't working with the heroes. 𝗟𝗏 appeared shaken but maintained her composure, which he found impressive. She assured him that she had healed and was fine, though he couldn't quite read her emotions. Deku was puzzled by her calm demeanor. If he were in her position, he would be furious. Perhaps that was the difference between heroes and villains. 𝗟𝗏 asked him what was on his mind, and he realized he had been staring at her in confusion. He remarked that she seemed very heroic, to which she responded with a hint of a smile, claiming it was a compliment. Feeling overwhelmed by the heroic energy in the room, Deku returned to his room. After an hour of solitude, he heard a knock at his door. Kaminari's voice called out, inviting him to join a video game session with him, 𝐼𝐻𝐼, and Mina. Deciding to give it a try, Deku agreed, thinking it couldn't be that difficult. Time passed, and he found himself losing every game. He was astonished at how much skill was required, and he felt a surge of frustration at the heroes for being better than him at something. It wasn't like there was time to train in video games. I had to focus on how to fight and survive. Besides, villainy doesn't pay well. The only way to earn cash is by going after someone with a bounty on their head, but those opportunities are rare. I had a high bounty myself, but no one had managed to take me down, until that pesky hero and the heat exhaustion got the better of me. I realized I had the villain class tomorrow after my regular classes and on the weekends too. At least I had 2 days off, so missing today's class and tomorrow's wasn't too bad. Still, I wasn't looking forward to it. Time passed, and it was time for Deku's villain class. The thought of being in a class with Toga made me uneasy. I was surprised she hadn't harmed anyone yet. I couldn't help but think she might try to stab me, but then I remembered she didn't have access to knives, just like I didn't. I was physically stronger than her, so I could handle myself in a fistfight if it came to that. As I opened the door, I saw not just Toga but also some other minor criminals who were kids. It seemed the pros had been busy. When I walked in, heads turned, initially out of curiosity since it had been a while since anyone had seen another villain, but more heads turned because of my notorious reputation. I recognized some familiar faces. I had probably crossed paths with half of these kids on the streets before. Suddenly, I heard Toga exclaiming my name. I braced myself for her enthusiasm. She seemed to be doing well, claiming she had made friends with many people. However, her mention of cutting each of them once she got out of this place reminded me of her true nature. I thought the heroes should be more concerned about her than me. If I were in that class, I would definitely feel uneasy. At least Toga hadn't tried to harm me yet. As I scanned the room, I noticed that there weren't any major criminals, just kids like me who had been caught for petty crimes. Most of us could potentially be labeled as serial offenders with just a few incidents under our belts. Toga was the exception. Her reputation preceded her. I had only heard rumors about her, stories of her eating a heart and drinking energy drinks like water without any side effects. Curiosity piqued. I turned to see who had just entered. It was the Reaper, a figure I had only heard whispers about. He looked younger than I expected, almost boyish, and appeared uninterested in the class, much like the rest of us. He exchanged a few words with Toga, and I felt a pang of envy at their camaraderie. I resigned myself to sitting alone, hoping not to draw too much attention. Moments later, the teacher walked in. My heart sank when I recognized 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐷. The Reaper muttered a frustrated comment about him, and I couldn't help but snicker. He had voiced my own thoughts. 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐷, despite his usual confidence, showed signs of weakness, and as villains, we were quick to seize on that. It was clear this class would not be easy for him. The class dragged on. Toga kept poking me in the back with her pencil, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it left a mark. 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐷 called on me to answer a question, catching me off guard. I glanced at the options on the board. A pickpocket, B walk past saying nothing, C help her cross the street, D stab her. The correct answer was painfully obvious, but I decided to have a little fun with it. Standing up, I addressed All Might with a hint of sass, explaining that I would walk past the person because I didn't know anything about her. She could be a threat or just an old lady needing help. The class stared at me, and I stood my ground, looking directly into All Might's eyes. Before I could say more, Izawa entered and clarified that the correct answer was C. He expected me to be able to defend myself against an old lady if necessary. Great, now I felt like I was being painted as weak in front of all these other villains. I couldn't let that happen. I am the imposing figure among them, and if they think I'm weak, they won't fear me, and I won't hold any power. That's how it is on the streets. As I walk toward Izawa, I ask about 𝗟𝗏, smirking as I do. Izawa informs me that 𝗟𝗏 is still in the hospital, with injuries worse than the doctors initially thought, meaning he won't be back to hero work for at least a year. I respond that it's good to hear, glancing around the classroom and noticing the whirl of confused faces. I casually mention that I took down 𝗟𝗏, which prompts Toga to remind me that I got arrested in the process. I declare that I took down the number 2 hero, and now all that's left is to take down the number 1 hero, casting a glance at All Might. Izawa tells me to sit down and let them teach, so I comply, knowing that resisting would only land me in more trouble. As I look around, I notice some students staring at me, but when I meet their gaze, they quickly turn away. I'm not surprised, they know I'm the top dog here. Practically everyone is intimidated by me, except for the heroes and Toga. At least I find comfort in having them under my thumb. The next day, during lunch, as I follow the current of students, someone unexpectedly taps my shoulder. I turn to see who it is, only to receive a punch to the face. I touch my nose and feel the pain. It seems broken. BLD trickles down my face and stains my uniform. This person is going to regret it. If I had my knives, they would already be in trouble. A circle forms around me and the person who punched me. I recognize him but haven't encountered him before. Regaining my composure, I smirk at this guy who dared to challenge me. He looks out of breath, likely having rushed here upon hearing about me. I scan my surroundings. The crowd of students makes it difficult to leave, and with the hallway congested, a pro hero will surely arrive soon. I need to handle this guy right now. This purple-haired guy is in over his head. Suddenly, I hear someone yell, warning 𝗏𝐿 about his reckless actions. So, this guy's name is 𝗏𝐿. He accuses me of killing his dad, and I realize this is why he punched me. It's a valid reason. His dad probably had a bounty on him, and I needed cash, making him an easy target. I decide to stay defensive in this fight. If I get caught, my plan to convince the staff to let me go will be delayed, and I want out of here as soon as possible. I start to explain that his dad probably had a bounty, but then I find myself unable to move. 𝗏𝐿 has caught me in his quirk, controlling me. I know he's going to come at me, and I can't blame him. If I were in his position, I might want to retaliate too. He demands that I admit to killing his father, and I find myself saying it, feeling his power over me. If I had the chance to eliminate a notorious criminal, I would take it without hesitation, just as other villains would. I need to break free from this control quickly. Suddenly, I feel a sharp pain in my left arm. I look down to see Toga holding a pencil stained with my BLD weight. I can move. That stab freed me. Toga stands behind me, looking disappointed, probably wishing she could have landed another hit. She decides to leave, promising to stab me another day, and I'm left facing 𝗏𝐿. I choose to remain silent, even though I'd love to taunt him. With a broken nose and an injured arm, I'm at a disadvantage in terms of pain, but I still have the upper hand in fighting experience. The protagonist had learned never to underestimate an opponent, so they were ready for anything this guy might throw at them. 𝗟𝗏𝐿's voice came from the crowd, expressing concern about the situation. The protagonist was engaged in a fight with 𝗏𝐿, who had just broken their nose, and they were determined to get some payback. 𝗟𝗏𝐿's worried expression suggested she was unsure whether to be scared for 𝗏𝐿 or for the protagonist, but they knew they needed to end the fight before the professionals arrived, just like they had done back on the streets. They began to walk toward 𝗏𝐿, realizing that they didn't need a weapon. Relying too much on a knife would not suit their villainous persona. Approaching 𝗏𝐿 from behind, they noticed he seemed frozen, likely fearing the worst. As they got closer, they could see him shaking, clearly distressed because his original plan had failed and he had no backup. The protagonist circled around him and delivered a punch to his gut with considerable force. 𝗟𝐿 doubled over and fell to the ground. Leaning in close, the protagonist whispered a piece of advice about having a backup plan for future fights. Almost immediately, they noticed some professionals rushing down the hallway, Izuku leading the group. Some students moved away, not wanting to get caught up in the chaos, while others cleared a path for the pros to reach them more quickly. The protagonist stood up and walked over to the teachers, who likely thought they were about to cause serious harm. One teacher checked on 𝗟𝐿, while Izuku turned his attention to the protagonist and instructed them to follow him into an empty classroom. Izuku expressed his frustration, asking how the protagonist could go even a week without causing trouble. The protagonist defended themselves, pointing out that they had only been on school grounds for about a week and deserved some credit for that. Just then, Toga entered the room with the teacher from Class 1B, who was known as the BLD hero. Toga had some of the protagonist's BLD on her, which was surprising since she had waited for the right moment to strike without facing serious consequences. Toga had something to say to the protagonist, and Izuku allowed her to speak. Toga expressed her relief that she hadn't killed the protagonist, but the BLD hero insisted she needed to apologize. The protagonist interjected, explaining that in the villain world, such statements could be seen as compliments rather than apologies. They pointed out that the phrase, "I'm sorry," often felt mocking, while Toga's comment indicated she was glad the protagonist could fight another day. The protagonist reflected on the stark differences between the hero and villain worlds, noting that heroes often failed to understand the villain perspective. Afterward, they were taken to Recovery Girl, who used her quirk to heal them. The protagonist acknowledged her skills, though they doubted she would ever SW's sides. Later, they headed to lunch and enjoyed the food, which was far better than the gas station meals they were used to. They sat with other villain students from different classes, feeling more at home now that they weren't alone. They shared a sense of camaraderie, discussing their views on stealing from large corporations rather than small businesses, which they deemed cruel. After lunch, they returned to class, anticipating the upcoming hero class with a mix of excitement and apprehension. As they were instructed to put on their gym uniforms and head to the main field, the protagonist complied, knowing they were already on Izuku's watch list. They wanted to prove they could avoid trouble, but it often seemed to find them anyway. Upon arrival, they noticed another class of students already present and recognized Toga among them, which filled them with dread at the thought of having to fight her. Kirishima greeted a classmate from Class 1B with an impressive handshake, showcasing their camaraderie. All Might was teaching the class, and the protagonist couldn't help but feel annoyed by his presence, wishing the League would take him out to make their life of crime easier and more thrilling. They listened as All Might explained the rules for the upcoming activities, bracing themselves for what was to come. "Alright, students, here's the plan. Both classes will be mixed together to form 2 teams. You will need to work with your teammates to capture members of the opposing team. Does that make sense?" As Deku looked around, he noticed people nodding their heads and chatting with friends about the announcement. Toga suddenly yelled in his ear, startling him. Instinctively, he swung at her, but she dodged the punch with surprising agility. The instructor continued, "We carefully selected the teams, so take a look at the board to see your group assignments. Team 1 consisted of Yosetsu Owaze, Shuhei Kawaro, Libera Shizaki, Manga Fukudashi, Kojiro Bando, Tagura Kamakiri, Yui Kodai, Setsuna Tokage, Reiko Yanagi, Hiryu Rin, Toga Himiko, Yuga Oyama, Tsuyu Azui, Koji Koda, Izuku Deku Midoriya, Minoru Mineta, Rikido Sato, Mizo Shoji, Fumikage Tokoyami, Achiko Uraraka, and Denki Kaminari. Team 2 included Senkaibara, Itsuka Kendo, Kinoko Komori, Juroda Shushida, Nirenjiki Shoda, Pony Tsunatori, Kozai Tsunatori, Tetsutetsu, Juzo Honenki, Nito Monoma, Mina Ishido, Katsuki Bakugu, Toru Hagakure, Tenya Ida, Kyoka J.R., Eijiro Kirishima, Masahiro Ojiro, Hantashiro, Shoto Todoroki, and Momo Yaoyorozu. Deku noticed his BNHA name on the board, which annoyed him. Uraraka pointed out that they were on the same team, but he chose to ignore her. Scanning Team 1, he recognized Toga, who could be quite useful. Although powerful, she needed someone to keep her in check to avoid chaos. The opposing team had some strong contenders. Deku was eager to face Todoroki, whom he hadn't fought before. He watched as Kirishima approached Bakugo, excitedly announcing that they were on the same team. Bakugo's response was dismissive, expressing his intent to take down a certain nerd. Deku couldn't help but smirk at the challenge. Toga and Deku were directed to a table with knives. Aizawa informed them that they could use the knives, but the goal was to capture, not to harm. He left as quickly as he came, reminiscent of a parent stepping out for a moment. Toga asked which knives he wanted, and without answering he selected 2 throwing knives, 2 daggers, and 2 standard knives. Toga grabbed 4 daggers and 2 throwing knives, and they stored them in their pockets and sleeves before rejoining their fellow trainees. All Might was still explaining the next steps. Everyone will receive a wristband in your team's color. This will help you identify your teammates. Deku realized that if he could obtain a wristband from the opposing team, he could blend in. Excitement bubbled within him. He donned a blue wristband while the other team wore red. Most students wore theirs on their wrists, but Yaoyorozu cleverly placed hers in her hair, utilizing her quirk. Team 2 headed off in one direction while Deku and Team 1 followed their instructor into another. They eventually found themselves on opposite sides of a mock city. With 10 minutes to devise a plan, Deku initiated the discussion. He introduced himself, stating his skills with a knife and emphasizing that he could handle himself without a quirk. Kaminari stepped forward next, introducing himself as someone who could generate electricity. His confidence seemed to uplift Class 1A. Mineta followed, explaining his sticky ball, while Sato mentioned his strength increasing with sugar. Azui described her frog-like abilities, and Aoyama boasted about his naval laser. Tokoyami introduced his powerful dark shadow, and Uraraka shared her ability to make objects float, introducing her shy teammate Koji Koda, who could communicate with animals. Shoji explained his ability to create additional limbs. After Class 1A had introduced themselves, Deku turned to Class 1B. Awase stated his welding abilities, and Tokage explained her power to detach and control parts of her body. Deku began to zone out, finding the introductions tedious until he was nudged back to attention. Manga introduced himself, explaining his quirk of turning speech into giant letters, while Kodia mentioned her ability to enlarge objects. Yanagi described her manipulation skills, and Hiryu shared his defensive scales that could also be launched as projectiles. Deku was pleasantly surprised by their capabilities. Uraraka interrupted, pointing out that someone had yet to introduce herself. She gestured toward Toga, who then declared her name and hinted at her penchant for stabbing, leaving the specifics of her quirk a mystery. Kaminari shuffled closer to Deku, curious if Toga was a villain. Deku shot him a look that conveyed his disbelief, prompting Kaminari to back away. Suddenly, machinery whirred to life, and the gates began to open. Deku felt a thrill of anticipation. As everyone rushed forward, he turned to Toga and suggested they team up. She eagerly agreed, and together they charged into the battlefield. Kendo observed as the gates opened, prompting everyone to rush inside. She chose to stay close to Monoma, knowing he had a tendency to get himself captured while laughing at others. They decided to navigate the darker streets, where they would encounter individual fighters rather than groups. As they ran, Kendo glanced down an alleyway and spotted someone standing over another person. She grabbed Monoma's arm, halting his movement, and signaled for silence. If it was one of their teammates capturing someone, they could potentially turn the situation to their advantage. However, if it was an enemy, they needed to be cautious. Peering around the building, Kendo realized she didn't recognize the person capturing the other. The captured individual was Tokoyami, and he appeared to be in distress. Kendo felt a knot tighten in her stomach, unsure if he was still conscious. Monoma broke the silence, expressing his impatience for the capture to happen. The blue-haired figure turned their attention toward them, and Kendo felt a surge of anxiety. The figure approached, hands positioned ominously on their body, and Kendo instinctively took a step back. Monoma, ever the provocateur, made a snide remark about the figure's appearance, which only seemed to escalate the tension. Kendo urged him to be quiet, sensing the imminent danger. The blue-haired individual muttered something under their breath before lunging at Monoma, prompting Kendo to leap back in anticipation. Meanwhile, Deku and Toga chose to traverse the darker alleyways as well, finding it easier to confront opponents in such settings. They heard Monoma's loud voice insulting someone, and Deku felt compelled to intervene, thinking it was time to put Monoma in his place. As they approached, Deku spotted Shigaraki cornering two students, one of whom lay motionless on the ground. Without thinking, he threw a pencil at Shigaraki, hitting him squarely on the hand he intended to use against Monoma. Deku was taken aback by his own actions, realizing he had instinctively defended Monoma despite being a villain himself. Shigaraki turned angrily toward him, and in the corner of his vision he noticed Monoma and Kendo making their escape, now that Shigaraki was distracted. Toga rushed over to Shigaraki, playfully teasing him about missing her. Their banter felt like a sibling rivalry, filled with annoyance and carefree joy. Shigaraki, however, was more focused on the situation at hand, expressing his frustration with Monoma. Toga suggested they take Monoma back to their headquarters instead of harming him, which caught Deku off guard. He didn't want to be tortured, and he considered negotiating a way out of the predicament. Ultimately, Shigaraki agreed to bring Monoma along, and before Deku could protest, he found himself pushed into a portal, transported to the League's headquarters. Todoroki, witnessing the aftermath, rushed to Tokoyami's side, checking for a pulse but finding none. He heard footsteps and turned to see Kendo leading several teachers toward Tokoyami. He stepped aside to allow them to assist. Aizawa pulled Todoroki aside, asking what had happened. Todoroki explained that he had been following Deku and witnessed him save Monoma from the blue-haired figure. Kendo confirmed Todoroki's account, detailing how Deku had intervened just in time. As they carried Tokoyami away on a stretcher, Aizawa pressed for more information about Deku's encounter with the villains. Todoroki recounted how Deku had resisted going with them, but ultimately, he had been pushed into a portal by Toga. Aizawa's expression turned serious as he explained the importance of protecting all students, regardless of their affiliations. He emphasized that Deku was in danger and that the League's methods of torture were severe. With that, he followed the medics, leaving Todoroki to contemplate the gravity of the situation. Bakugo observed as everyone gathered in the main area, anxiously surrounding Aizawa-sensei, eager for answers. One of the students asked if their classmate would be okay. Aizawa-sensei reassured them that the student would pull through, explaining that although his heart had stopped for a brief moment, they had managed to get him to the hospital in time. However, his condition remained delicate, and he wouldn't be attending class for a while. A wave of relief washed over the room. Another student inquired about Deku, wondering what had happened to him. They had been given very little information, only that 2 classmates were missing from their dorm that night. Bakugo had learned about the situation from Kirishima, as he hadn't noticed anything unusual at first. In a flashback, Bakugo recalled the chaotic moment when they were instructed to exit the building quickly. He and Kirishima had exchanged frustrated words, trying to make sense of the situation. Normally, alarms would sound if someone entered UA without authorization, but there had been silence. They arrived at the main gate and noticed their class felt smaller, prompting Kirishima to express concern. Bakugo dismissed it, believing they would return eventually, and they headed back to the dorms, instructed to stay put for their safety. Bakugo begrudgingly admitted to himself that he was relieved the bird guy was okay. He wasn't as bothersome as some of the others. Still, he felt a twinge of worry. If Deku was out there, he had access to dangerous items and might come after him if given the chance. Meanwhile, Deku found himself in a frustrating situation. It seemed the League of Villains only knew how to kidnap people, and he was growing tired of it. They hadn't even bothered to restrain him properly. They simply locked him in a basic room with concrete walls, a bare mattress, and a metal door. There was even a drain in the corner, presumably for BLD. It had been a day since his abduction, and he was bored, expecting more action. The last thing he remembered was arriving at their headquarters through a portal, being shoved inside, and having a quirk-dampening bracelet removed before being locked away. After a few hours, he heard the door open and opened his eyes. One of 𝐒𝐮𝐲's minions informed him that the boss wanted to speak with him. Deku recognized the minion as Spinner, who looked like an alligator and dressed like Stain. As he followed Spinner down the hallway, he noticed the pocket knife in Spinner's possession and attempted to grab it. However, before he could, someone seized his wrist and pulled it away. It was 𝐼𝐷, holding the knife. Deku greeted 𝐼𝐷 with a wide smile, pretending nothing had happened. 𝐼𝐷 reminded him that he was the reason for his capture, referencing their previous conversation about 𝗟𝗏𝐻. Deku leaned in closer, acknowledging the tension. 𝐼𝐷 let go of his wrist, taking the knife and putting it in his own pocket. Spinner, confused, realized what had happened and asked for his knife back, but 𝐼𝐷 coldly refused. 𝐼𝐷 then informed Spinner that he would take Deku to see 𝐒𝐮𝐲. As they walked, Deku heard distant screams, a reminder of the villain hideout's nature. They soon reached the bar area where 𝐒𝐮𝐲 was seated. Deku greeted him cheerfully, knowing that his smile would annoy 𝐒𝐮𝐲. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 asked if Deku knew about the summer training camp the UA students were attending. Deku realized this was likely about gathering information. He felt uneasy as he noticed several important members of the league present, making it clear that he couldn't attempt anything reckless. If it had just been 𝐒𝐮𝐲 and Deku, there might have been a chance to escape, but now that seemed nearly impossible. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 expressed that he didn't know much, only what the rest of the class had been told. He mentioned that if they failed their exams, they wouldn't be able to attend the training camp. He added that the camp would last about a week and would be beneficial for training and enhancing their abilities. 𝗟𝗏𝐽 and 𝐒𝐮𝐲 exchanged glances, leaving Deku to wonder what they were thinking. 𝗟𝗏𝐽 listened as Deku shared what he knew about the training camp with Shigaraki. He had expected Deku to know more, but if that was all he had, then so be it. 𝗟𝗏𝐽 had to persuade Shigaraki not to resort to extreme measures to extract more information from Deku, as his initial plan had involved using a taser. Once Deku finished speaking, 𝗟𝗏𝐽 looked over at Shigaraki. The intensity of Shigaraki's bloodlust was palpable, and 𝗟𝗏𝐽 marveled at how he managed to keep it in check. He asked Shigaraki for his thoughts, to which Shigaraki replied that they knew more than the students, making victory seem easy. Deku's expression revealed his confusion as he glanced between Shigaraki and 𝗟𝗏𝐽. Deku questioned what Shigaraki meant by easy victory and what his plans were. There was a hint of anger in his tone, though it was subtle. Shigaraki, with a long pause, asked if Deku cared for the students. Deku stammered that he would never care about them, but 𝗟𝗏𝐽 sensed that he had formed some attachment, even if he wouldn't admit it. This concern weighed heavily on 𝗟𝗏𝐽. If Deku stood in Shigaraki's way, he would be in grave danger. Deku insisted to himself that he didn't care about others. His last experience caring for someone had ended badly, and he couldn't possibly have grown attached to the heroes in such a short time. He despised heroes, viewing them as obstacles. Shigaraki continued, asking if they would kill a student if they captured one. Deku responded without hesitation, asserting that it would be easy, especially since he had taken many lives before. Toga then interrupted, asking why they didn't just tell Deku everything. Shigaraki revealed a stack of photos, laying them out on the table. Deku recognized the faces of his classmates from Class 1A, including 𝐾𝐿, and felt a frown form at the sight. Shigaraki explained that these were the 6 students their 𝐼𝐻 wanted them to capture. 𝗟𝗏𝐽 clarified that it was for their quirks, which would be used for experimentation. It didn't matter how they obtained them, even if it meant eliminating others who got in their way. Deku questioned whether they only needed him for information or if there was more to it. Shigaraki confirmed that he would be coming along with them. The situation was becoming increasingly precarious. Deku sarcastically remarked about the thrill of the situation, asking if he could return to his cell or if there was more to discuss. He hoped Shigaraki would share more information, as his reaction to the training camp indicated he knew more than Deku did. Shigaraki had one more thing to say. He reminded Deku that he had previously stopped him from harming the students at UA. The memory struck Deku. He had indeed intervened, but he questioned why he had done so, as he had no real attachment to them, having never met them before. If anything, the choice to stop 𝐒𝐮𝐲 from killing them was a mistake. Instead of letting him take Toga and me out of UA, I hesitated. The conversation turned to torture, and the thought of that made me uneasy. 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐸 questioned why I had intervened, pointing out my stutter. I insisted that I didn't care about them, that as the Reaper, I was indifferent to their injuries or deaths. But the stutter betrayed me, revealing my fear and uncertainty. I realized that perhaps I did care for them. They had been kind to me, even when I was at my worst. They had let me play games with them, and while heroes were supposed to be nice, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had grown attached. Would I truly be able to eliminate them if they stood in my way? Most likely, but it would weigh on my conscience. Toga waved her hand in front of my face, snapping me back to reality. I was muttering again, a habit I thought I had broken. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸 pressed me further, asking if I could go through with the task or if he would have to take matters into his own hands. I assured him that I could do it, that if he stayed out of my way, it would be simple. If I wanted to save myself, I had to follow through. It was a harsh truth, but one I had to accept. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸 told me to return the next day for more information about the job, and as I left, he reminded me that the heroes were searching for me. I was limited to this area, and there was no way I could return to my apartment, not with the surveillance still in place from my last job. I couldn't skip town either, that would only put me on more hit lists. I didn't want to go against UA, either. With my history, I would likely end up arrested again. At least they had been kind to me, but I was a villain, and heroes and villains didn't mix well. I needed to sort out my priorities. I ended up sleeping in a back alley since there was no way I could return to my not-so-secret villain hideout. Stray animals wandered around, mostly cats and a few dogs. I spotted a clock in a shop window. It was around 10. I decided to head toward the League's headquarters. My plan was to comply with the League for now. I was wanted in multiple places, so laying low was essential. I knew they were planning an attack on the training camp, with a list of targets to capture alive while others could be eliminated. It sounded straightforward, but I doubted my ability to go through with it. If I was to survive, I had to eliminate them, but 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸 had mentioned that if they weren't in my way, they wouldn't have to die. That was a good plan, but heroes wouldn't let their friends be taken without a fight. Why did they have to be so heroic? Upon entering the League's bar, I leaned against the far wall and scanned the room. About 10 others were present, some familiar from the previous day, while others were new faces. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸's voice broke the silence, asking who was missing. 𝗟𝗏 replied that we were waiting for one more person. The atmosphere was tense, though everyone tried to hide it. Toga slid over to me, calling me by my name. I asked her to call me Deku or the Reaper, which caught everyone's attention. They were surprised that a 15-year-old was the Reaper. It was part of my power to be underestimated. Toga handed me some knives, and I thanked her, though it felt odd to express gratitude. I was supposed to be intimidating, not polite. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸 asked 𝗟𝗏 if our missing member would arrive soon, noting that it was already 10 minutes past the appointed time. Just then, the door opened, and a larger figure with a hood entered. Not many people here concealed their identities, which felt unusual. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸 began outlining our mission. We would be attacking the training camp where the UA first-year hero students would be. It was a strategic move given the losses the League had suffered in previous encounters. He explained that groups had been formed with specific tasks. 𝗟𝗏 took over, detailing the assignments. 𝗟𝗶H would team up with Twice to create chaos in the forest, while others would focus on eliminating any heroes in our way. The plan was set, and I felt the weight of what lay ahead. Toga was assigned the task of collecting BLD from as many people as possible. She responded with an enthusiastic thumbs up. Mustard was instructed to create a fog that would incapacitate their targets and corner them. Moonfish was told to eliminate anyone who stood in their way, while Compress was given a list of individuals to capture. Muscular was advised to capture but had the freedom to eliminate if necessary. Finally, everyone's attention turned to Reaper, who greeted 𝗟𝗏 with a wide smile. Reaper was tasked with capturing the individuals on the list and eliminating anyone who obstructed the mission, with a stern reminder not to get captured again. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸 ominously warned that failing to capture someone would lead to dire consequences. Despite feeling a pang of anxiety, Reaper maintained a smile, knowing it irritated 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸 informed the group that they had 1 week to prepare, during which they were not to leave the hideout unless instructed. 𝗟𝐼 suspected that 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐫 wanted her presence for the reputation it brought to the league, believing that having the 𝗟𝐼 on their side would deter challenges against 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐫 and lend the league more credibility. 𝗟𝐼 pondered how to acquire a villain outfit, realizing that unless a new one was made in a week, she needed to come up with something suitable. 𝗂𝐻𝐬 opened the floor for questions, and 𝗟𝐼 seized the opportunity to inquire about her outfit. Muscular questioned why they couldn't leave, to which 𝗂𝐻𝐬 explained it was to avoid any risk of arrest. 𝗟𝐼 reiterated her need for a villain outfit, expressing her reluctance to attack UA in a gym uniform or regular clothes. 𝗂𝐻𝐬 assured her that they could provide an outfit and other gear for the group. With no further questions, 𝗂𝐻𝐬 instructed those who knew their room locations to leave, while others were to stay. 7 members promptly departed, and 𝗂𝐻𝐬 directed the rest. 𝗟𝐼 made her way to her average-sized room, equipped with a bed, a closet, and minimal furnishings. She left her room to explore the halls in search of food, having not eaten much the previous day. She also needed to find knives, her primary weapon, wondering how 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐫 expected her to capture or eliminate anyone without them. Although she could manage without weapons, it would be more challenging, especially with the formidable team 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐫 had assembled. The plan was in place, and Class 1A was in for a tough time. As a week passed, 𝗟𝐼 had acquired knives, a new villain outfit, and was ready to leave that night for the training camp attack. She had formed a bond with Toga over their shared interest in knives and strategies for incapacitating opponents. The week had been trying, with many of the other villains proving to be less than reliable. 𝗟𝐼 decided to target 𝐾𝐮𝐲𝐽, planning to knock him out at the first opportunity to facilitate an easy capture. A voice called out from the hallway, asking if she was ready. 𝗟𝐼 replied affirmatively, storing knives in her sleeves and shoes before heading to the bar area to meet the others. Some wore unusual gear, but 𝗟𝐼 focused on her mission and the goal of breaking free from the league. She had laced one of her blades with a tranquilizer, ensuring that a single cut would render her target unconscious. However, she needed to be cautious not to use it against Kirishima while he was in rock form. Before they departed, 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐫 requested a private word with 𝗟𝐼, clearly not asking but commanding her attention. They moved out of earshot from the rest of the group. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 began to mention 𝗟𝐼's mother, causing her expression to darken as she realized her secret was out. Anger surged within her as she demanded to know what 𝐒𝐮𝐲 had done to her. 𝐒𝐮𝐲's response revealed he was aware of her feelings, and he hinted at the consequences should she fail in her mission. 𝗟𝐼's resolve hardened as she vowed to protect her mother at all costs. He needed to give it everything he had, or she would be in serious trouble. With that thought lingering in his mind, he walked away, leaving the protagonist alone in the hallway, fists clenched. It was clear that they had to step up their game. Uraraka had just finished being sorted into pairs. She was teamed up with Tsu, who was impressive, especially when it came to heroics. They were ushered into the forest for the courage test. The first few encounters were intimidating, but they pressed on. Eventually, they spotted some strange smoke in the distance. Was this someone's quirk at work? Deku observed as everyone moved to their designated areas. Shigaraki wasn't getting his hands dirty. Instead, he had sent in a Nomu. It was a weak move. As smoke and fire erupted, Deku began to stalk his target. He couldn't find 𝐾𝐮𝐲𝐽 outside, so he assumed he must be inside the building. When he noticed a figure resembling 𝗂𝐵H enter, he slipped inside as well, hiding around the corner as Eraser and Vlad exited the building in pursuit of the 𝗂𝐵H copy. This was too easy. Once they were outside, he locked the door, ensuring it would be noticeable if they returned. He stepped into the room where the pros had been moments before. Perfect. There were 6 students inside, 5 from Class 1A and 1 who had nearly been killed by Shigaraki during a previous kidnapping. As soon as he entered, all eyes turned to him. Kirishima seemed almost relieved to see him, but then questioned why he was there. Deku decided that since Kirishima was present, he might as well take him along. He just needed to incapacitate them first. He brandished his blade, suggesting that if they didn't want to see someone get hurt, they should send 𝐾𝐮𝐲𝐽 and Kirishima over slowly. This way, he could quickly incapacitate 𝐾𝐮𝐲𝐽 with his tranquilizer blade and take down Kirishima before anyone could react. 𝐾𝐮𝐲𝐽 asked what would happen if they complied. Deku explained that if they listened, there would be fewer casualties than if they chose to fight or try to outsmart him. Kirishima felt trapped. He could fight, but with his quirk protecting him from knives, he knew that if they didn't comply, someone else could easily be harmed. He glanced at Denki, realizing they were in a precarious situation. The look in Denki's eyes indicated he was about to do something reckless. Deku addressed Monoma, who had been surprisingly quiet throughout the tense encounter. Monoma boasted about how he had taken down a villain and saved someone from a weaker class, questioning how he was still alive given the danger around them. Deku dismissed Monoma's bravado, throwing a knife that narrowly missed him and struck the wall behind. While everyone was distracted, Deku moved behind Monoma, pressing a knife to his throat. He explained that he was referring to someone who had nearly been killed by Shigaraki, a villain known for his unsettling appearance. Deku had saved that person from a near-fatal encounter, highlighting the irony of being saved by a villain. He smirked at the thought of causing harm, revealing his true nature as a villain. Deku urged them to cooperate, emphasizing that it would be a waste to kill Monoma. If they came with him peacefully, there would be no issues. He reminded them that he had saved Monoma earlier, even if he wouldn't admit it. Kirishima asked what would happen once they complied. Deku responded that it depended on whether they wanted to hear what they hoped for or the truth. Kirishima insisted they wanted the truth. Deku explained that they wanted him to lead them to fight the other villains, betraying those who trusted him. However, he hinted that he would show them what would actually happen if they just walked over to him. Kaminari interjected, claiming he knew how to walk, but Deku sensed that he might not fully grasp the gravity of the situation. Denki contemplated his options. If he unleashed an electric attack, it could incapacitate everyone, but it might also leave them vulnerable to other villains. He was fatigued from training, which meant he might not have enough power to ensure Deku would be knocked out. Aiming at Deku could risk hitting Monoma instead, but would that be so bad? He found the situation incredibly annoying and thought he might be doing everyone a favor. However, if he targeted someone other than Deku, it could give Deku the chance to retaliate, and he knew how formidable Deku could be during training. He was still upset about Deku's earlier deception, claiming he was ditching on the first day when he wasn't. It felt like Aizawa-sensei had given him extra homework because of it. Returning to the task at hand, Deku observed that the others seemed to be stalling for time, likely waiting for a pro to intervene. He realized he needed to make the first move. He pushed Monoma into Kirishima, managing to slice him just enough for the tranquilizer to take effect. While everyone was distracted, he dashed toward Kirishima and struck him as he was busy catching Monoma from falling. Both of them collapsed to the ground, and the remaining group was now on high alert. At least he had one of his targets, but he still needed to get Kaminari. He cautiously approached the group of 4, who took fighting stances. He was not fond of facing a large group, but if he could incapacitate them and secure his targets, it wouldn't be too bad. As he advanced, he noticed them looking up, confused. Suddenly, he realized one of the pros was using her quirk to communicate telepathically with them. He wondered what she was saying. Kaminari remarked that they didn't have to hold back, to which Ishido suggested they should probably be cautious. Understanding their situation, he knew they had been given the green light to fight if necessary. He couldn't let them stop him from taking his targets. If he failed to secure at least one of them, his mother would be in grave danger. They likely wouldn't allow him to walk away with one of their friends, so he had to either knock them out or find a way to prevent them from following him. Now standing over the unconscious individuals, he threw one of his knives near Ishido's head, forcing her to use her quirk just in time to avoid it. Immediately after, he aimed another knife at her leg, causing her to fall in pain. That was one down. As Ishido yelled in distress, he took the opportunity to tranquilize Kaminari. He noticed that the others were so concerned for their friends that they let their guard down, which he exploited to his advantage. He added Kaminari to the pile of unconscious bodies and realized they hadn't attacked him once. He wondered if they had grown attached to him, but quickly dismissed the thought. They were likely plotting a way to take him down without causing serious harm. Ishido lay on the ground while 𝐼𝐻 wrapped fabric around her wound and taped it in place. He had to admit it was a clever move, but it wouldn't stop him. He taunted them, questioning if they would ever attack or if he would simply pick them off one by one. He preferred not to make the first move, as it often allowed the opponent to counterattack, but these individuals seemed more focused on each other than on him. Deciding to take action, he threw a knife close to Sato's head and another at his leg, using the same tactic again. Sato fell to the ground in pain, leaving 𝐼𝐻𝐬 as the last one standing. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 looked at him with pleading eyes, and he offered 𝐼𝐻𝐬 the chance to bandage his friend's leg to prevent him from bleeding out. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 nodded and hurried to help Sato, taping his leg as he had done for Ishido. Once 𝐼𝐻𝐬 stood up, he faced Deku, ready to fight. Deku expressed his disappointment, wishing 𝐼𝐻𝐬 had taken the hint and let him take who he needed. Instead, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 chose to be a brave hero. Deku knew this was a losing battle for them. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 launched tape at him, which he dodged, but 𝐼𝐻𝐬 anticipated his movement and sent tape to where he would land. With tape stuck to his face, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 pulled him closer. In response, Deku drew his tranquilizer knife and struck 𝐼𝐻𝐬 as soon as he was within range, quickly peeling the tape off his face. He then approached the two injured individuals and struck them with the tranquilizer knife to prevent them from healing too quickly. Now he faced the challenge of carrying both of them, which would slow him down significantly. Deku exited the building, dragging the two unconscious individuals into the woods. He needed to find a vantage point. Scanning the area, he spotted mostly trees but recalled a nearby mountain that could serve his purpose. If he reached it, he could signal Kurogiri for assistance and get them to their destination. He hoped he wouldn't encounter anyone along the way. Kota felt panic rise within him. The imposing figure before him seemed dangerous, and he feared for his life. Just then, a voice behind him interrupted his thoughts, expressing frustration at not being alone. He turned to see the green-haired villain, who glanced at the unconscious heroes being carried. Kota realized he was in a precarious situation, trapped between two villains, one of whom had already taken out two heroes in training. The villains exchanged glances, clearly not pleased to see each other. The larger one complained about the green-haired one being a favorite of Shigaraki. In response, the green-haired one laughed, which made Kota back away, pressing against the wall to avoid any conflict. The laughter stopped, and the green-haired villain dropped the person he was carrying. He addressed the larger one, claiming he was merely trying to survive and questioned who the child was that had been tormented. Kota realized he was the one being referred to and shouted back that he was not a child. He felt he had nothing to lose and decided to stand his ground, hoping to make his parents proud by not giving up. The green-haired villain approached him with a knife in hand, confirming his status as a child. He was not a child tormenting another child, and he believed that the other should not take down such easy prey. Kneeling in front of me to meet my gaze, he suggested that instead, the other should actually do some of the work. He turned his attention back to the muscular figure nearby, reminding him of their purpose for being there. It sounded like he was picking a fight. The one in front of me leaned closer and whispered for me to go as he stood up and walked slowly toward the other guy. I began to back away cautiously. He questioned why everyone felt the need to fight, suggesting that I could simply leave him alone, and he would hand the bodies over to Shigi, ensuring I would never have to see him again. The muscular guy responded that once he took me out, he would claim those captures for himself. The other guy's ego was always apparent. I was now close to the exit and took off. Running. In the distance, I heard the big guy yell that I was getting away, to which the other guy responded, wondering what I could possibly do. Tell the teachers. I considered it, but I doubted he was afraid of them. His tone implied that they could handle them easily. What if they were already gone? I couldn't bear the thought of more heroes falling due to reckless quirks. I glanced back at the mountain and noticed BLD falling from the edge of the cliff. It was far too much for someone to lose and still be alive. I hoped it wasn't the smaller one who had met a grim fate. I continued running and spotted someone in the distance, praying it was an adult. It turned out to be the tired teacher. I rushed up to him, trying to catch my breath while explaining the situation. He assured me that they were aware of the villain attack and that we needed to get to safety. I nodded, still exhausted from my escape. The adult led me to the classroom building, but as soon as we entered, we halted in shock. 3 of my classmates were unconscious, along with one from Class 1B. I instinctively moved Kota behind me to shield him from the sight, but he pushed past me to check on some of the students. I watched as he used his water quirk to wash away some of the injuries. Then I realized 2 students were missing, Kirishima and Kaminari. They hadn't gone to fight, had they? I had to find them. I told Kota to try and wake them up and rushed out of the room, heading toward where the child had fled. Eventually, I reached the mountain and spotted a cliff with BLD pooling over the edge. I climbed up, hoping it wasn't the BLD of my students. When I reached the source, I saw Deku lifting 2 of my students, carrying them toward a portal. I called out to him just before he could throw Kirishima into the portal. This caught him off guard and he turned to face me. His expression was not that of a villain. He looked like a broken child. He told me I didn't understand, and I asked if he could help me understand. He replied that I wouldn't be able to. Realizing I might have to confront him, I took a fighting stance as he set Kirishima down, a tear glistening in his eye. It seemed he didn't want to fight, but felt he had no choice. He drew his knives and assumed a fighting stance, locking eyes with me. He threw a knife and then another in quick succession. I blocked both, knowing his moves from watching my students train. I threw my scarf, but he dodged it effortlessly. His reflexes were impressive. I dashed behind him and wrapped the scarf around his leg, pulling him down. I noticed BLD appearing from his shoulder. He must have cut himself on his own blade. He struggled to stand, disregarding his knives as he moved toward Kirishima and Kaminari, dragging them toward the portal. I sprinted after him, but just as he reached the portal, Deku collapsed, unable to send anyone through. In a faint whisper, he asked me to save his mom before he fell asleep, leaving me with a multitude of questions. Earlier, Deku had moved the muscular body to another side of the cliff. He saw Shigi and Kurojiiri on top of the mountain. Kurojiiri opened a portal as Deku prepared to move one of the bodies before they could wake up. When he heard someone yell, he turned to see Aizawa, desperate to stop him from sending his student through the portal. Deku felt conflicted, knowing he was sending students to their deaths, but he believed he had no choice. He yelled back that I didn't understand, explaining that if he didn't do this, his mom would be in danger. I asked him to help me understand, but he insisted I wouldn't be able to grasp the situation. He dropped Kirishima and took a fighting stance as I did the same, drawing 2 knives. He threw his knives at me in quick succession, but I swatted them away. He had been studying my fighting style. I replaced one of my knives with a laced one. He swung his scarf at me, and I used my knife to block it while ducking out of the way. Suddenly, I realized he was behind me. I felt his scarf wrap around my ankle, pulling me off my feet. As I fell, my laced knife slipped and cut me. I had to act quickly. Using the last of my strength, I stood up, weary, and dropped my knives. Maybe if I could at least capture them, Shigaraki would take it easier on my mom if he got some of his prey. Hopefully, he would see that I was trying. Hopefully, he would put her out of her misery when I was captured. I tried to pick Kirishima up, but my muscles were already giving out. I dropped what little I had managed to lift and fell to the ground, my eyelids forcing themselves shut. With my last bit of energy, I thought about saving my mom, and then everything went dark. Time passed, and my eyes slowly opened to the realization that I was now in jail. The room was stark white, furnished with a bed and a large glass window. I sat up and noticed some people on the other side of the glass scrambling around, likely because I had woken up. The door to the room opened, and Aizawa walked in. There were still others in the room, but I doubted they would leave me alone, whether I was in a cell or not. I avoided looking at him, thinking that if he hadn't captured me, I could have captured the 2 and escaped, and my mom would be fine. Now she was probably. I didn't want to think about it. A tear slipped down my face as I clenched my fist, still not paying attention to the others in the room. Aizawa addressed the people shuffling around in the back, asking them to leave. When they hesitated, he assured them that he could handle anything that might happen. Once they left, silence enveloped the room, leaving just Aizawa and me. After a moment, he informed me that my mom was alive and safe. This caught my attention, and I looked toward him, hoping he was talking about my mother. He explained that they had tracked the League of Villains thanks to Yaoyorozu, who had given trackers to other students. Aizawa and some other heroes had swooped in just in time to rescue her and apprehend 6 members of the League. 6 people arrested. 3 of them captured after the attack. I knew that one killed was Muscular. That left 5 others. Excluding Muscular and me, that meant 10 people. My gut told me that Mustard, the other kid, had been captured. Even with his gun, I figured the heroes could take him down easily. Then there was Moonfish. Aizawa pulled me from my thoughts, noting that I had been staring. I casually admitted to killing Muscular and asked who else had been captured. He explained that during the attack, the villains known as Moonfish and Mustard had been apprehended, while Toga, Dabi, and Shigaraki were caught when they attempted to capture my mother. The thought of Shigaraki in a jail cell made me chuckle a bit, but then I realized that Toga would likely be going back to UA. Aizawa informed me that the UA rehabilitation program had shut down due to negative media coverage and funding cuts. Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose, explaining that several people wanted to talk to me, but only a limited number would be allowed in at a time for security reasons. He then asked if I wanted to see my mom. My heart raced at the thought of seeing her again. He nodded and looked toward the door, and I followed his gaze, wondering what was happening. I had expected a dramatic entrance, but instead, he mentioned he needed to go into the hallway to get her. With that, he left the room, and 3 security personnel entered. I wondered if Shigaraki and the others were in the same jail. Maybe if I behaved well, they wouldn't keep such a close eye on me, and I could gain more access to the prison. Though I doubted it. I heard a key card unlock the door, and the doors slowly opened. She walked in, and my heart leaped. "Izuku," she said, tears in her eyes. Tears streamed down my face as I took in the sight of her. My mom. I stepped closer to the glass, pressing one hand against it, and she did the same. We were both crying now, probably looking crazy, but I didn't care. This was a touching moment, and the guards could just deal with it. "Izuku, you're alive. And in prison. My son is a villain," she said, her voice cracking. The weight of her words hit me hard. "I'm sorry, Mom," I sighed, feeling the guilt wash over me. "It's just Bakugo and people." No excuses, Izuku," she interrupted, and I flinched slightly at the name. "You can't blame your childhood friend for your actions." "Oh my lord, my son is a murderer." I looked down, avoiding eye contact, and dropped my hand from the glass. I had gotten myself into this mess. But if I was already teetering on the edge, he was the one who had given me the final push into this pit of despair. "Izuku, please tell me you're not planning something," she pleaded. I hesitated, knowing I had to be honest. "Okay, hear me out. Once I escape, I can." "No, please don't try to escape. I worried about you for a year." "A year, Izuku?" "I didn't know if you were kidnapped, or dead, or anything. I couldn't sleep for weeks." The realization of my absence's impact struck me. "I'm glad you're still alive," I said, hoping that would ease her worries. "What type of statement is that?" "I care about you, Izuku. I won't stop worrying. That's why I need you to stay in prison and get some help. Please. Hopefully, after all this, you can re-enter society as a decent person. As my son." I didn't know how to respond. Should I tell her what she wanted to hear or what I truly felt? "Izuku," she said, looking down at her feet. "When the villains showed up at my house, before the heroes took them down, the one with hands on his face spoke about the possibility of the other being a villain. Doubt clouded her mind. She didn't want to believe it. As a child, he had always been so happy, so kind, and so warm-hearted. Even without a quirk, he managed to make the best of every situation. She wondered what had happened and where she had gone wrong. Tears glistened in her eyes, filled with sorrow as she looked up. "This isn't your fault," she thought. "I did this to myself, just as you said. I love you, Mom, and I will try. I will try to get out of here the right way." She told her mother some of what she wanted to hear, mixed with her true feelings. Ms. Midoriya's time was up, and she needed to leave, one of the guards announced. "Already? It hasn't even been that long," her mother replied. "It's okay, Mom. I'll be here," she reassured her. "Okay, I love you and I will be back," her mother said. "Love you too," she responded. With that, her mother left, and the doors shut behind her just as another person walked in. Oh gosh, he was here. She leaned against the white wall at the back of the cell. She was surprised to see him. Whatever he said, arms crossed. "I lost a bet, so I have to be here until I get kicked out." This to be him, she thought. So, she wanted details. Who made the bet? What did he lose? Also, what day and time was it? No one had told her those things yet. He didn't respond, and she felt a surge of frustration. You know what? It would be a shame if the press stopped by to interview me about literally anything, because they are like piranhas. I might just tell them about our childhood and the things you've said and done. It would be such a shame. She moved closer to the glass, noticing the mix of fear and anger on his face. You wouldn't, he said. Oh, I would, she replied, smiling. And you only want information? He asked cautiously. Yes, that and an apology, she said. A what? He asked, confused. An apology. I know that might be a new word for you, but I would like an explanation and an apology. Fine, which one do you want first? He finally caved in. Give me the information first, I want to savor the apology. So the bet? Tell me about it. He sighed. Pikachu made a deal with me that if he lost, he would stop talking for a week, and if I lost, I would have to visit you in jail. And what was this bet? He bet that I couldn't name everyone in our class. And you lost. You actually don't know everyone's names. This was hilarious. She couldn't help but laugh. Even if she tried, she could name them all. It was what he got for calling them names all the time. Yeah, whatever. What else did you want to know? The date and time, please, she said, still smiling. Wednesday, and it's around 12:30, he replied. So she had been out for some time. Now for the icing on the cake. The apology. What do you want me to apologize for? Well, I do have a list, she said, pretending to search for pockets. Well, I think I forgot it while I was being arrested. Anyway, let's start with years of torment and, oh yeah, telling me to take a swan dive off the roof. She gave him a piercing glare. Fine. I'm sorry for years of torment and for telling you to take a swan dive off the roof. Honestly, that went better than she thought it would. All she had to do was threaten his hero career. For the rest of the time, he stood in silence while she lay down on her bed. Eventually, he was told to leave and quickly exited. Maybe if she had the opportunity to leave, she would, but for now, it wouldn't be so bad doing her time. She wanted more people to visit her. Tormenting him was fun. At least she got an apology out of him.